Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. Marvel's Humanoid Magic Weapon. Chapter 21. The professor was already furious due to the heartbreaking pain. How could he listen to advice? Opening his eyes, they were bloodshot, filled with overwhelming murderous intent and no sense. Spider-Man missed the opportunity, and Professor Lizard looked up to the sky and howled. This howl seemed different from before, full of anger and change. Everywhere he looked, all the humanoid lizards who heard the professor's howl started to stir. They listened attentively, as if they heard some order. In an instant, all the lizards rushed over Osborne Tower. Parker looked at this scene, his scalp was numb, and he was helpless. At this moment, a voice rang out. "Parker, how long have you been here and how is the situation?" Parker's eyes lit up. Wasn't it Fang Tian who came? Thinking of Fang Tian's powerful strength, he gained some confidence again. After Spider-Man finished explaining the situation in a few words, Fang Tian frowned. "It seems that we have to split up again." Parker was a little confused. Looking at the surrounding situation, "It is better for us to join forces to fight against the enemy." Fang Tian explained. "My defense is strong, and you know that no matter how many these lizards are, they can't do anything to me. As for you, you should know how to make the antidote to the lizard potion." Excitement flashed in Parker's eyes. With the antidote, coupled with the canary equipment, today's situation can be saved. Fang Tian nodded. Seeing that the situation was critical, Spider-Man didn't care what he was talking about. He nodded to Fang Tian and swung downstairs. A smile flashed in Fang Tian's eyes, and he said to himself, "Parker, I have swallowed up all the equipment in the Osborne building. This should save a little more time. The more lizards that come, the better. Let's talk about Professor Lizard. If he wants to run away when he sees someone who has made him suffer a big loss, how can he be willing to obey?" He jumped over. Before upgrading, Fang Tian could pin Professor Lizard to the ground and beat him wildly. Now that he has been promoted to a small level again, why would he take him seriously? His figure flashed and stood in front of the professor. The professor's sanity was not much left at this time, and it seemed that he didn't even recognize Fang Tian, who had caused him great losses one after another. Seeing that there was another person in front of me, he kept moving and rushed towards him. With a crisp sound, Professor Lizard's dagger-like nails hit Fang Tian, and were broken by the huge strength of the two of them. But there was only a trace of invisible white marks on Fang Tian's body, which disappeared in the blink of an eye. Fang Tian suffered the blow and remained motionless. He stretched out his hand and grabbed the incoming thigh-thick tail. It seems that Professor Lizard's strength has increased after injecting medicine many times. The strength of this tail is not small, and Fang Tian was also knocked back a small step, leaving 2 deep footprints on the roof of the building. "You really don't remember to eat or fight. Has your brain even deteriorated? This forgets the previous lesson. Tear off the professor's tail with force and roll it into the space for refining." Fang Tian squinted his eyes comfortably. At this time, the sky was still filled with green mist, which seemed to have improved the professor's recovery ability a lot. In the blink of an eye, another tail has grown out. The large piece of flesh and blood that was torn on his back has also completely recovered. Fang Tian's eyes lit up when he saw this. He didn't expect that the green mist in the sky could have such a function. It seems, today's harvest will be greater than expected. After one encounter, Professor Lizard suffered a small loss. He walked cautiously around Fang Tian, seeming to be looking for opportunities. At this moment, a harsh sound sounded, like iron nails. He scratched the glass with force, making people's teeth ache. It turned out that a lizard had climbed up from below. Behind Fang Tian, a green-skinned lizard as tall as a person poked its head out. Seeing that Fang Tian's back was turned to him, he thought it was a good opportunity, so he immediately pounced over and grabbed Fang Tian's back of the head. At the same time, the lizard professor in front of him also pounced over, piercing the interviewer's eyes with his claws. Fang Tian was not confused at all, ignoring the attacks before and after, and the green dragon swung its tail. He used it and kicked on the chest of the lizard behind him. The black shadow in front of his eyes was getting bigger and bigger, as if the world was covered. Fang Tian seemed to have no time to blink, and the professor's claws had already stabbed his eyeballs. The next moment, the smile on the professor's face froze. There was another crisp sound, and Fang Tian was unharmed. Fang Tian just blinked, feeling a little sore in his eyes. As for the lizard behind him that was hit by a green dragon with its tail swaying, there was no trace of it. Is he alive? His heart burst on the spot, and he couldn't be more dead. Fang Tian even had time to open up the space in his body, sucked him in, and refined him in the blink of an eye. Humans who turned into lizard monsters had different effects. Extraordinary. This one is as powerful as 3 or 4 ordinary people, and it is not in vain for Fang Tian to plan a plan. You know, at this time, all the lizards gathered densely downstairs, not just hundreds or even thousands. Ordinary humans, these lizards will not go out to massacre, but these lizards are different. Even legally, there is self-defense. Although no amount of lizards can hurt Fang Tian, it does not mean that Fang Tian is so kind, we're attacked by them. Who is Fang Tian? Making trouble out of nothing, let alone a great opportunity like this. In his eyes, those lizards that later changed were not even qualified to be reused, so they had to be cut off at once. Let's talk about Professor Lizard, who stabbed Fang Tian in the eye, but when he saw that Fang Tian didn't care, his eyes almost popped out of his head, and his face was full of disbelief. Pointing at Fang Tian tremblingly, "How is it possible? My nails can pierce steel, how is it possible that I can't even hurt your eyeballs?" Fang Tian naturally couldn't explain. Do you want him to tell the enemy that all over his body, is there no weakness inside or out? He has not yet thought of exposing his trump card to the enemy. Therefore, he just curled his little finger contemptuously. The professor was a little surprised. After looking at the dozens of lizards that had climbed up, he regained his confidence. No matter how strong you are, how many of the hundreds of thousands of compatriots around me can you defeat? Fang Tian chuckled and said, "What trouble can hundreds of thousands of ants cause?" Hearing this, Professor Lizard roared angrily, and he and dozens of lizards around him attacked. Professor Lizard's attack was very effective, and if the professor died, Fang Tian didn't know if so many lizards would disperse. Therefore, the professor ignored the attack and withstood it. But when he saw an opportunity, he pulled off one of his tails and made him roar in anger. These lizards that later mutated are naturally much stronger than ordinary people. Good recovery power will give policemen with firearms a lot of headaches. If Spider-Man were here, with his character, he would definitely not kill him and would find it extremely difficult. But in Fang Tian's eyes, these people are really just ants, who can be killed easily without causing much trouble. Not long after, Professor Lizard's tail had been pulled off 20 or 30 times, and he was so angry that he roared repeatedly. In the midst of medicine, his recovery ability was indeed much higher. The last time he was at school, his tail had only been broken a dozen times, and his recovery had slowed down. Today, the professor still shows no sign of fatigue. He casually slapped it on the waist of a charging lizard, and heard the clear sound of bones breaking. His body had become an acute angle, and he was crawling on the ground struggling for his life. Fang Tian didn't give him this chance, so he sucked the lizard into the space inside his body and refined it in one breath. It was also because Fang Tian's suction in the space was weak at this time that it was so troublesome. He also needed to beat the enemy until he was unable to resist before he could suck it in and refine it. Otherwise, as long as there is a space, wouldn't these lizards rushing towards him be delivering food to him? There were already hundreds of lizards killed by Fang Tian. There were no fewer lizards on the rooftop at all, but more and more, densely packed everywhere. Having said that, thanks to Fang Tian's fast refining speed, otherwise, the expanded space in his body would not be able to accommodate the many lizards he killed. All the corpses were pulled into the space for refining by Fang Tian. However, inevitably, a large amount of blood still sprayed out and flowed everywhere on the rooftop like a stream. As the killing continued, the blood had spilled out of the rooftop and flowed down the glass exterior wall. The entire Osborne building was dyed red. There are green dots crawling on the blood-red building, which are humans who have turned into lizards. Seeing that Fang Tian became more and more courageous as he fought, the lizards around him still had murderous looks on their faces, showing no sign of fear. Lizards are cold-blooded animals, so how can they be afraid? In addition, these people have been blinded by the intention to kill, so they are naturally less afraid. Fang Tian walked back and forth among the lizards, as if he was in a deserted place. Osborne Tower has been completely destroyed. Suddenly, the entire rooftop collapsed and hit the next floor. In an accident, many lizards fell from the roof, bringing down a bunch of them like candied haws, and they were all smashed into meat pies. Not only were these lizards not afraid, they howled into the sky and became more and more violent. Seeing Fang Tian's invincible appearance, Professor Lizard felt like retreating. Looking at the corpse that disappeared inexplicably, his eyes lit up, as if he had some idea. He stopped attacking Fang Tian in the crowd. He hid among the lizards and casually cut the head of a subordinate next to him into 3 halves. He grabbed the lizard's body, tore off a piece of flesh and blood, and chewed it with blood spurting out of his mouth. This trick indeed works. The green on Professor Lizard's scales became more and more obvious, and his body gradually expanded. Thick bone spurs even gradually grew on his elbows, knees, and back. As he continued to hunt, his body, which was originally somewhat human-like, became less and less human-like. The lizards on the roof were killed by both parties, and all of them died soon. The remaining lizards were also timid at this time. Looking at their leader, they seemed to have some doubts. Is this really their leader? At this time, there were already about 200 lizards refined by Fang Tian, plus the ones killed by Professor Lizard. The ground was covered with blood and severed limbs, extremely slippery, and the smell of blood went straight into the sky. Quietly, after refining nearly 200 lizards, and coupled with Professor Lizard's vigorous attack, Fang Tian had been promoted to the level of a top-grade magic weapon. In fact, it is not far from the level of magic weapon. The magic weapon is only equivalent to that of a monk in the foundation building stage. When the body evolves to the level of a magic weapon, it will be equivalent to that of a monk in the golden elixir stage. A golden elixir is swallowed into my belly, and my fate is determined by God. The golden elixir mentioned here is not the golden elixir that breaks into a baby and then turns into a soul, but the golden elixir of the Great Tao, the foundation of the Great Tao. Once the golden elixir is completed, it will be polished from then on until the golden elixir is perfect and becomes an immortal. In other words, this stage is already the last step before becoming an immortal. As for those extra steps, they were only re-divided because the spiritual energy of heaven and earth gradually dried up, and later generations found new ways to cultivate immortality. In ancient times, where was the nascent soul? The Chaos Book of Chaos practiced by Fang Tian is the highest weapon refining book that has been passed down from ancient times, and naturally follows the steps of the ancient times. There is no difference between the two, just different methods. It is precisely because the span between the two levels is too large that if you want to improve in the future, it will not be as simple as now. This is something that needs to be considered only after promotion. The most urgent task now is to deal with the completely changed Professor Lizard. At this time, Professor Lizard was covered in bone spurs and muscles. He was 7 or 8 meters tall and was no longer human. It roared, and the surrounding lizards fled in all directions. Power, this is my power. So powerful, who else can stop me? Fang Tian chuckled. Don't overestimate your capabilities. Professor Lizard's fist-sized eyes turned around. He seemed to have regained some sense and recognized Fang Tian. Fang Tian, Parker's classmate. Fang Tian said, I didn't expect that it would be me whose head has become bigger and whose IQ has recovered a lot. It looked around, looking at the pool of blood and broken limbs at its feet. What happened? Before the question could be finished, it suddenly held its head and screamed so sharply that the reinforced glass on the exterior wall of the building was shaken with cracks. Fang Tian looked at this scene and thought to himself, my strength has increased a lot. I hope I can be promoted after this battle. This can be considered the final role you can play. Single quote. After screaming, the professor suddenly raised his head, his eyes full of murderous intent, no longer clear. I remember, it was you who pulled out my tail dozens of times. Today, you are dead and no one can save you. Fang Tian has just advanced and his strength has increased. Even Professor Lizard has also greatly increased his strength, but what does he have to fear? Mother-in-law, like a pussy. As he spoke, Fang Tian straightened his little finger and turned it downward. Professor Lizard bared his fangs and pounced on him without saying a word. After evolving, its strength was incomparable. With a kick of his legs, there was a big hole in the ceiling, and the 7-8 meter high body rushed towards Fang Tian with the evil wind. Fang Tian was not afraid at all, and used the same strength with both arms to hold the huge palm it hit. He never thought of its power. It was so big that with a loud bang, Fang Tian had already smashed through the ceiling, and with more force, he crashed through the outer wall and flew down from the Osborne Tower, which was 200 to 300 meters high. Fang Tian was not Spider-Man, so he couldn't spray spider silk was in midair, unable to move with all his strength, and hit the ground like a meteorite. Fortunately, his physical strength was not comparable to Spider-Man. Falling from an altitude of 200 to 300 meters, he only smashed a piece of spider silk out of the ground. In the pit, he himself was unscathed, just disgraced and a little embarrassed. In the pit, Fang Tian shouted, "It's cool, this is good enough." Professor Lizard has been dealing with Fang Tian for so long, and he also knows that he will not die so easily. After blasting this blow, it chased down from upstairs without mercy. Fang Tian was the same, he did not being able to fly relies on a tough body. A 7 or 8 meter tall monster fell from a height of 300 meters. What kind of power does it have? It is really like a god. This godlike figure is now hitting Fang. Heaven. Such a great opportunity, of course Fang Tian would not dodge. He raised his palms to block the big feet falling from the sky. Amidst the loud noise, the pit several meters deep deepened 5 or 6 times, and underground water spurted up like a fountain. The foot drove Fang Tian into the ground like a nail. In the end, he refused to let him go. He twisted it on the ground repeatedly before leaving Fang Tian's head. With a bang, muddy water splashed everywhere, and a figure emerged from the ground. Next, after falling to the ground, he belched twice and spit out a mouthful of dirt. "This is enough energy, this is the feeling you want." Fang Tian was still talking to himself there, but Professor Lizard's big palm had already grabbed him, pinched his head, and smashed him everywhere like a small insect. When it was the turn of the car, the body of the car was smashed into a discus. It was the Pilar's turn, cement splashed everywhere, and steel bars flew around. After having enough fun, the professor threw Fang Tian to the ground and took a deep breath. With the physique of Professor Lizard after his second evolution, Rao still took a deep breath after performing these actions. It can be seen that he has exhausted all his strength. After suffering this blow, Fang Tian felt as if he was in a sauna, extremely comfortable. Before he could enjoy it for long, the professor's attack suddenly stopped. Fang Tian opened his eyes dissatisfied, looked at Professor Lizard who was breathing heavily on the spot, and couldn't help complaining, "He is indeed an old man, he is not satisfied yet, and he is wilting." Professor Lizard's scales seemed to stand on end with anger. "When I got up, the bone spurs on my body were steaming." Fang Tian's eyes lit up. It seems that when fighting men in the future, you can mock this aspect more. It seems to be more useful than other taunts. Single quote. Fang Tian was distracted during the battle, and Professor Lizard would not be polite. Perhaps it was because Fang Tian was mocking him for being weak, so the professor actually bent his arm and stabbed hard between Fang Tian's legs with the extremely sharp bone spurs at the tip of his elbow. At this moment, Fang Tian was knocked into the ground from the middle of his body, with his head and feet raised high. If it weren't for Fang Tian's whole body being one and the same, with no difference in defense, he would really become a eunuch now. Although it didn't hurt, Fang Tian was a little angry because that part was attacked. Seeing that the professor was unwilling to give up and seemed to want to attack the same part, Fang Tian finally moved. He jumped up and reached the same height as the professor. A whip kick has been thrown on the professor's face. Fang Tian had already used all his strength on this whip leg. According to the fact that Professor Lizard did not have the strength before his second evolution, perhaps his head had already turned 360 degrees from his neck at this time and fell directly. But at this time, it only shattered the professor's cheekbone and made a big crater. After the professor evolved, his recovery power seemed to have improved a lot. In the blink of an eye, most of his injuries were recovered. Fang Tian didn't care either. He was just angry because the professor attacked an important part of his body, so he just wanted to take revenge. He didn't really want to kill the professor. If you kill the professor now, where can you find such a good training partner? A few minor injuries were mostly recovered in the blink of an eye, but who could not be angry after being slapped in the face by Fang Tian? Unless he is a saint, Professor Lizard is not a saint. On the contrary, he has an extremely bad temper. Fang Tian had just attacked his leg, but before he hit the ground, the professor's counterattack came. The body turned sideways, and the pillar-thick tail hit Fang Tian's waist in midair. Fang Tian swirled and flew out like a cannonball. The body that flew out hit a large hole in a water tanker, and then crashed into the counter of a nearby bank before stopping. Money was flying in the sky and scattered all over the floor. Fang Tian picked up one and said, "Real banknotes. Isn't this nonsense? Where can counterfeit banknotes be stored at bank counters?" Professor Lizard had already chased him in. Fang Tian waved the money in his hand towards Professor Lizard. "Hey, big lizard over there, let's talk about it. I'll give you $100. How about you hit me a few more times?" Professor Lizard said nothing, pinched Fang Tian's arm and kicked him out like a football. As for the $100 bill, it was naturally shattered into pieces and nothing was saved. The professor bent down and walked out of the bank. Fang Tian was already waiting for him at the door. He made fists with both hands and hit Professor Lizard on his toes with a cannon. Flesh and blood turned into mud and mixed together. With a whoop, Professor Lizard suddenly jumped up, his upper body crashed through the ceiling of the bank, and hung there dangling. Although it can be recovered, it doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. Everyone jumps when their toes are suddenly broken. It was a great opportunity, but Fang Tian was not sure about it and watched helplessly as the professor broke free. "Since you don't charge me, then consider this as my reward for you." He had already felt that he was not far away from breaking through, so he decided to provoke Professor Lizard and make him work harder. The professor became even more angry as expected. He swept his arms and blew Fang Tian away together with a large piece of land. In midair, Fang Tian stretched out comfortably before falling heavily to the ground. Before he could get up, Professor Lizard dragged the water tanker over with a strange creaking sound. Without saying a word, he picked up the water tanker. Smashed. The remaining water overflowed, turning the surrounding area into a quagmire. At this moment, a fire suddenly rose up in the quagmire, turning the entire car into molten iron. Along with one of the professor's arms, it also turned into molten iron. It turned into charcoal and fell down. Before it hit the ground, it had already vaporized without a trace. The mud on the ground also turned into magma, and gradually solidified as the fire stopped. In the magma, a naked person the figure came out. "Ah, this massage is so relaxing. All the bones in my body relaxed a lot." What came out of it was Fang Tian after his advancement. That burst of fire was naturally the new ability that Fang Tian had after his advancement. This fire was none other than a mixture of the three treasures of essence, energy, spirit and human body. The true fire of Samadhi has become the true fire of Samadhi. The true fire of Samadhi cannot be extinguished by water. How can it be done by the ordinary water left in a water tanker? After Fang Tian was promoted to the third-level magic weapon body, he was like a monk who formed a golden elixir. His essence, energy and spirit were integrated into one body, and he naturally ignited the Samadhi fire. This Samadhi true fire is also a natural evolution of the body's advancement. It is closely integrated with his previous abilities, making his refining ability even more powerful. For example, before advancing, Fang Tian's refining ability may not be able to refine the adamantium alloy that makes up Wolverine's claws, but now, combined with the original refining power, plus the Samadhi true smelting by fire and refining adamantium alloy are no longer a dream. There is also a more important ability, which is that the power of refining can be released. The essence of things burned to ashes by the true fire of Samadhi will naturally be absorbed into the body, which is equivalent to being refined. Of course, there will be some loss during the process, and the loss is about 20%, which is not as perfect as the refining space in the body. There are also some other wonderful uses, which will not be listed in detail here, but will be discussed later. The most important thing at this time is to refine the lizard professor in front of him first. Because Fang Tian had already seen a shadow vaguely appearing in the distance. If it wasn't Spider-Man Peter Parker, who else could it be? When he spreads the antidote, who knows what will happen? Therefore, Fang Tian prepared to make a quick decision. Being caught in the flames and losing an arm in the blink of an eye, Professor Lizard stood aside in shock and confusion. With such a powerful ability, why didn't he use it early on instead of allowing him to attack for so long? Fang Tian seemed to see his doubts. "Parker is coming soon, and you are not going to die soon. It's useless to know so much, why not just go to hell with doubts?" He didn't see him accumulating power, and in an instant, Fang Tian has appeared behind Professor Lizard. He reached out and grabbed the professor's tail, pulled it off, and took it into the space inside his body for refining. If you can save a little, just save a little. Parker was almost here. Fang Tian couldn't just let the 7 or 8 meter tall professor disappear in front of Spider-Man, so he had to use the Samadhi True Fire to refine him. Inevitably, 20% of the energy will be lost. In an instant, the professor didn't even notice Fang Tian's figure, and his tail had disappeared. It was startled. Could it be another new ability that it had not used yet? He would never have the chance to ask this question. Because Fang Tian's figure flashed and appeared in front of the professor's eyes. I saw that his arm was covered with 3 color flames, and it was inserted as smoothly as a hot knife cutting butter, and it went directly into the depth of the elbow. In less than a second, the professor's brain had been roasted by the real fire of Samadhi. The eye area also turned into a big black hole. Like pushing down a jade pillar from a mountain of gold, Professor Lizard's 7 or 8 meter tall body fell backwards, stirring up a cloud of dust. No matter how strong his resilience was, he would never get up again. The true fire of Samadhi can even burn the soul and spirit. If the soul is gone, how can the body recover? Until the professor arrived, Spider-Man arrived just in time. Looking at the hideous and terrifying body in front of him, he was a little disbelieving. This is the professor. What's going on? As he spoke, the flames in the professor's eyes had spread and covered his whole body. 10 seconds later, its huge body had turned into a pile of small black ashes, drifting away in the wind. From then on, there was no longer Professor Lizard. Fang Tian only felt a huge amount of essence pouring into his body. If he had obtained this essence during the magic weapon stage, it would have at least allowed him to upgrade from a low-grade magic weapon to a high-grade magic weapon in one go. But for him at the magic weapon level, it is just a drop in the bucket. Feeling the power surging and reverberating in his body, Fang Tian replied, "You also saw it, this is the professor." Parker looked at the ruins around him and the Osborn building stained red with blood, and didn't know what to say. Good. In the end, he pointed to the blood-red Osborn building. What about that one? Fang Tian said, "It's blood, the blood of New York City citizens who turned into lizards. There might be 300 or 400 people. Some of them were killed by me in battle. You also know that it is impossible for me to control my power just right all the time. The rest were all eaten by the professor, and it is precisely because of this that the professor became what you see." After a while of silence, That's it, that's it. Parker murmured to himself again and again, and comforted Fang Tian again. Don't blame yourself, it's inevitable. If it weren't for you, I don't know how many casualties it would have caused, maybe even thousands or tens of thousands. These people died because of the professor's ambition. Fang Tian saw Parker's silence and thought it was for some reason. Unexpectedly, he was trying to organize his words to comfort himself. He was so happy that he was about to sing loudly. How could he blame himself? Speaking of which, most of this incident was due to his connivance only reached this level. However, he had no intention of blaming himself. Patting Parker on the shoulder, Fang Tian said, "In the battle just now, there were too many lizards. I didn't care about the canary equipment. Now hurry up and see if the equipment can still be used. Hundreds of thousands of citizens are still waiting. We're trying to rescue him." Spider-Man suddenly came to his senses, and without caring about Fang Tian, he quickly said, "I'm going up, you should be careful." As soon as he finished speaking, the spider silk had already popped out and he jumped up. Fang Tian finally breathed a sigh of relief. After he walked out of the magma, his clothes were all turned into ashes. He had been naked the whole time while talking to Parker. Parker was too shocked to pay attention to this matter, but Fang Tian felt a little uncomfortable. Because of the fight between the two, there was no one around. Even the lizards dispersed after the professor transformed. Therefore, Fang Tian didn't hesitate and found an intact fire hydrant, violently unscrewed the lid and rinsed his body. After flushing, grab the fire hydrant outlet and apply a little force. Amidst the sound of steel twisting, the water flow slowed down. Surrounded by the true fire of Samadhi, the water droplets all over his body have been evaporated, leaving only the streamlined muscles exposed. Looking around, there is a clothing store not far away. I went in to find some clothes that fit me, but as for the money, I didn't have any money left. After looking around, Spider-Man hadn't come down yet. It just so happened that Fang Tian also wanted to try his new ability. The first is Samadhi True Fire, which has already been used. It is actually somewhat inaccurate to say that it is the true fire of Samadhi. To be precise, it should be the art of fire control, which can control all fires in the world. When the cultivation level is reached, he can control Nanming Li Fire, Sun True Fire, Red Lotus Karmic Fire, etc., but now Fang Tian can only use Samadhi True Fire. Samadhi True Fire also has an advantage. As its cultivation level increases, its power becomes stronger and stronger. Because it itself is composed of the three treasures of the human body's essence, energy, and spirit, its power is naturally closely related to its cultivation. Secondly, there is the basic ability that comes with being promoted to a magic weapon, which is weapon flying. Flying with a weapon is more like a basic instinct than an ability. It can be said that there are few magic weapons that do not have this ability. When Fang Tian arrived, he was a magic weapon in his own right, and he could only fly with his own body. With a thought, Fang Tian levitated out of thin air. It is really like an arm commanding, flexible and free. If you are an ordinary monk, when you first learn to fly with a weapon, you will of course need to practice for a while. As for Fang Tian, what he controls is his own body. Is there any magic weapon that can be more flexible than his own body? Naturally, you become familiar with it as soon as you get started. Seeing that Parker hadn't come down yet, Fang Tian soared into the sky and reached the top of the building in the blink of an eye. Spider-Man was playing with the canary equipment when he suddenly saw Fang Tian flying up and his eyes widened. When did you become able to fly? Didn't you say that you got this ability after being bitten by an ant? Fang Tian said, I just remembered that when I was explaining my abilities, I really told Parker that. As soon as he thought about it, he said, maybe I was bitten by a flying ant. Parker looked like he had seen a ghost, obviously not believing this argument. Seeing that Fang Tian was unwilling to speak out, he did not pursue it. He said somewhat happily, fortunately, there is nothing serious about the equipment. It's just that some parts are scattered and stained with some blood. After I clean and install it, it should be ready for use. The top of the tower where the canary equipment was originally placed has completely collapsed. But since Fang Tian can fly, this is naturally not a problem. After loading the antidote to the lizard potion, Fang Tian held up the equipment and flew high into the sky. Press the launch button and the antidote shoots high into the sky. It was the same scene as the lizard potion spreading, except that this time it was filled with blue mist. The blue antidote fell like snowflakes. As soon as the blue snowflakes came into contact with the furious lizards on the street, their scales slowly melted away and turned into the original skin color of humans. Seeing themselves restored to their original state, countless citizens cried with joy, thinking that it was God's mercy that saved them. He knelt on the ground devoutly and murmured prayers to God. Over the Osborne Tower, Fang Tian and Spider-Man looked at each other and smiled. However, after seeing the sea of blood around him, Parker fell silent again. What should I do with this canary device? Fang Tian threw the equipment down. It's better to destroy such dangerous equipment. Parker nodded in agreement. Fang Tian flicked his finger slightly, and a spark floated out. The spark fell on the equipment, and instantly melted the equipment into molten iron. After that, the spark did not go out until the molten iron turned into residue, and then it flashed in a flash, it disappeared. Naturally, Fang Tian also refined the canary equipment based on the idea that mosquitoes are small but also pieces of meat. Spider-Man looked at the sparks that popped up. Could it be that there is another kind of thing in the world that I don't know about? Ants that can breathe fire. Maybe, this is a mutant ant. Go to hell, who are you trying to coax? If you don't want to say it, don't say it. Fang Tian smiled and said nothing. Everything was done. Professor Lizard was reduced to a pile of ashes, and the antidote had been launched. The roof of the Osborne building was bloody, and Fang Tian and Parker were not in the mood to chat under such conditions. After destroying the canary equipment, the sound of police cars sounded in the distance. The two glanced at each other, nodded to each other, and left separately. Fang Tian did not cause any trouble, so he flew to a deserted corner, landed, and walked away into the distance. Countless people on the street looked around in confusion, and no one noticed the low-key him. Fang Tian did not go home, but went to find Gwen first. With such a big noise happening outside, Gwen must be very worried now. Fang Tian knew where Gwen's home was and went straight to the door. After knocking on the door, it was Gwen who ran over to open the door. She was very excited to see Fang Tian safe and sound, and quickly pulled him in. Because Fang Tian had called in advance, Gwen's family was safe and sound. Even Sheriff George, Gwen's father, who was away from home, was notified by Gwen. After Sheriff George let Spider-Man leave, he was still uneasy and rushed to the Osborn building himself. When I saw the green mist in the sky, I remembered my daughter's phone call and hid in a police car, closed the windows tightly, and escaped. At this time, New York was in chaos, and all the police were busy. Chief George was directing outside and had not returned yet. However, he had already called to report that he was safe, which made Gwen and her daughter feel at ease. The decoration in Gwen's home is not luxurious, mainly in elegant brown colors, and is very warm. After entering the door, the first thing that caught his eye was a woman about 40 years old, with blonde hair and slightly green eyes. "Let me introduce, this is my mother. Mom, this is my classmate, Fang Tian, he is an Asian." Fang Tian said hello. "Hello, Mrs. Stacy." Gwen's mother was very enthusiastic and pulled Fang Tian over. "Don't be so polite, just call me Aunt." Actually, Gwen did not reveal Fang Tian's identity. She just said beforehand that something might happen after getting the news, so she sealed all the doors and windows. Not long after, something really happened, and pedestrians on the street came into contact with after the green mist fell from the sky, it turned into a big green lizard. Fortunately, they had taken measures in advance and nothing happened. After those people recovered, Fang Tian came to the door not long after. It was such a coincidence. How could Mother Wen not guess where her daughter's so-called news came from? There was a war and chaos outside, so how could ordinary people come to visit a classmate's house at any time? Having guessed Fang Tian's identity, she did not make it public, but her enthusiasm was enough to avoid it. "No, it's not even meal time yet." After sitting down and each person bringing a drink, Mrs. Stacy returned to her room, leaving the two young people space to talk. Waiting for Mrs. Stacy after returning to the room, Gwen had time to care about Fang Tian. "How are you now?" Fang Tian took a sip of orange juice to quench his thirst. Then he said, "Don't worry, you also know my abilities. I'm unscathed now." I explained to Gwen what happened. Of course it was a modified version of what happened, which was similar to the version that Parker knew. After hearing this, Gwen was a little surprised. "You mean, it was Professor Connors who caused the scene outside?" Fang Tian nodded. "Unexpectedly, such a thing would happen. I used to be a doctor's assistant, and Dr. Connors was usually very enthusiastic." Fang Tian. After being injected with the medicine, he is no longer a human being. He thinks the lizard's body is more perfect and cannot treat him with normal thinking. Gwen still feels a little pity. Indeed, just as she thought, Professor Connors is usually a gentle, enthusiastic, and ideal person. This kind of person is indeed worthy of admiration. But it has made hundreds of thousands of people in New York City. It was he who caused the citizens to turn into lizards and caused huge losses. At best, Fang Tian only condoned him, and the doctor did everything himself. The two were talking, and the door opened. As soon as Sheriff George came in, he saw Fang Tian. Unexpectedly, his first reaction was to immediately draw his gun and point it at Fang Tian. "Don't move and stay away from my daughter." Gwen was confused and immediately stood in front of Fang Tian. "Dad, what are you doing?" "This is my classmate." Sheriff George did not relax and shouted. "Gwen, go away, this man is very dangerous." As mentioned before, after Chief George let Spider-Man leave, he felt uneasy and followed him in the car. In Fang Tian's previous Life movie, Chief George also helped Parker a lot, and finally Professor Lizard stabbed him with his claws. Dead. In this life, with Fang Tian's existence, Professor Lizard's plan was successful. Sheriff George escaped death by relying on the information he got from his daughter. At that time, his car was not far from the Osborn building. Therefore, Chief George watched the entire fight between Fang Tian and Professor Lizard on the ground. Fang Tian was originally wearing a mask, but the mask was burned by the magma during the fight, allowing Chief George to see his true face. This is why he is extremely vigilant. The reason is. Gwen screamed. Put down the gun first. Where did you get the information that allowed you to escape the drug-missed attack? With the pistol pointed at him, Fang Tian showed no fear. Just kidding, a mere pistol could hit even the hair on his head. What he was worried about was that if the pistol went off, it might hurt Gwen in front of him. Regardless of her struggles, pull Gwen behind you. Sheriff, I mean no harm. You saw my battle with Professor Lizard, right? So tell me, how did this disaster end? Fang Tian paused for a few seconds, leaving time for Chief George to think. If we had waited for you police to solve the problem, the casualties might have been 100 times worse. Besides, most of the police have turned into lizards. Will you be able to solve this problem at that time? This is said unkindly, but it is true. Fang Tian fought with Professor Lizard for a long time, which was enough time for Peter Parker to rush to other companies, prepare the antidote to Lizard Potion, and rush back. During this time, the police were in what to do. It's not that the efficiency of the police is really that low, but that the police system itself has collapsed. Even S.H.I.E.L.D., at most, could only stop the people who turned into lizards on the periphery, and did not have the ability to break through to the center of the battlefield. Even if they have powerful weapons, and the lizards in front of them are all citizens of New York City. Is it possible for them to cause a massacre in the city? This is why Fang Tian has been fighting Professor Lizard for a long time without anyone coming to disturb him. Reason. After hearing this, Chief George finally calmed down. Thinking of Fang Tian's powerful strength, if he wanted to do something, what was the use of this small pistol? Withdrawing the pistol, he asked, "You come, what's the intention here?" "Don't worry, I won't reveal your identity." Fang Tian said, "What intentions can I have? Your daughter and I are good friends, so I just came to care about her. As for leaking his identity, I'm afraid Fang Tian's information has already been placed in front of S.H.I.E.L.D. and high-level government officials. The matter is too big. There are cameras everywhere in modern society, and you might be caught at some point. In addition, S.H.I.E.L.D. and the government's military satellites and reconnaissance planes are not just for free. It is probably impossible to continue to hide the identity, and Fang Tian has already made this preparation. Like Spider-Man's identity, S.H.I.E.L.D. has known it for a long time. Just ignored it. Not to mention that Fang Tian usually acted in his true colors. Knowing that Fang Tian had no ill intentions, Chief George still seemed reluctant to communicate with Fang Tian. The atmosphere gradually became awkward. Fang Tian could think of it with his toes. Sheriff George's thoughts are simply that he doesn't want his daughter to deal with extraordinary powers, and is afraid that her daughter will be affected and harmed. His worries are not unfounded. This kind of thing is very likely to happen. As time goes by, Fang Tian's enemies more and more, sometimes he would have this worry. However, he was confident that he had the strength to protect his relatives. Seeing that the communication was not smooth and the atmosphere was awkward, Gwen tried to ease the atmosphere, but it was of no use, so Fang Tian simply said goodbye. Being targeted like this by Chief George, he felt slightly unhappy. Before leaving, he changed his mind and took out the pistol he had collected. He pointed it at his eyes. "Chief, I know what you are worried about, but I will solve it. Those who have troubles can also solve their own troubles." Gwen was shocked. "What are you going to do?" Fang Tian turned a deaf ear and fired directly. In the blink of an eye, the bullet had already hit the eyeball. The eyeball was intact, and the bullet was completely squeezed flat. It was caught on the eyelid and did not bounce away. He pinched the bullet and threw it out casually. Jumping on the table, he bounced in front of Director George. Director George was stunned. He knew Fang Tianqiang, but he didn't expect him to be so strong. The bullet hit his eyeball at close range, and there was no reaction at all. Doesn't it mean, without the use of heavy weapons, no matter how many troops come, they can't do anything to him? There was silence in the living room, and Mrs. Stacy ran downstairs in a panic. "What happened?" "I heard a gunshot." Director George covered it up. "You heard it wrong, the sound made by the TV just now." Gwen's mother was doubtful. Fang Tian had a good impression of Gwen's mother and greeted her politely. "Auntie, I'm leaving. Thank you for your hospitality." Gwen's mother looked disappointed. "Leaving so soon? Won't you play for a while?" "No, I still have some things to deal with." At that moment, Fang Tian walked out, and Gwen also followed. There was still a faint voice from inside the door. George, what happened? Ignore the communication between Gwen's parents. After going out, Fang Tian first apologized. I'm sorry, I was impulsive just now. I think your father was completely targeted at me and was impulsive. Gwen said angrily. You scared me. I know my father doesn't like people like you and Parker, but you should not do this again in the future. It scares people to death. The two of them hugged each other outside the door and said goodbye to each other. When I got home, I opened the door and saw someone was already waiting inside. One of them is a middle-aged man with a slightly receding hairline, a suit, a black tie, and bright eyes. He seems to be smiling at all times, making him hard to dislike. He was holding sunglasses in one hand and flipping through some information with the other hand. The other person is a woman with a graceful figure. Fang Tian knew both of these two people. One was the famous super agent Black Widow, and the other was director Shield's right-hand man and a die-hard fan of Captain America, Level 8 agent Phil Coulson. He had long thought that S.H.I.E.L.D. would come to his door, but he didn't expect them to act so quickly. Now that these two people are here, their identities must have been exposed. Fang Tian was not nervous at all, and closed the door calmly, ignoring the looks from the two of them. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat down and drank it comfortably. As time passed by, Fang Tian pretended that the two of them did not exist and did whatever he had to do. Watch TV and drink coffee. Soon it was dinner time. Fang Tian thought that the day was over. Coulson finally spoke. Mr. Fang, this is not the way to treat guests. Fang Tian dug his ears in confusion. There seems to be a sound. Has your home been robbed? Wandering around the room but not answering. Coulson was helpless. Mr. Fang, let's talk. Fang Tian, there is a thief in the house. Do you want to call the police? I'm afraid that the police and this thief are working together. Coulson, Mr. Fang Tian, or should I say, Ant-Man. Hearing Coulson call him Ant-Man, Fang Tian finally couldn't help but refute, is that okay? If this title spreads out in the future, will he still be able to hang out? I don't know any Ant-Man, that's a terrible name. Besides, I'm afraid I have nothing to talk about with thieves who break into houses. Black Widow listened to the conversation between these two people and couldn't bear it anymore. I said you two, please be normal. Coulson glared at the Black Widow. Formal introduction, we are members of the Homeland Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics Support Agency. I am Phil Coulson, and the lady next to me is Natasha Romanoff. The two of us are not trespassing into people's homes. No matter what documents you need, I can provide them right away. While talking, he took out a bunch of FBI documents from his pocket. CIA ideographic, NSA ideographic, the police station has them all. Fang Tian didn't even look at the evidence. What happened to the two agents that they found on me, a humble citizen like me? Coulson said. Sir, you are not a humble citizen. If you are unhappy, I'm afraid neither of us will be able to get out. While talking, a stack of photos was pushed over. Fang Tian took it and took a look, and it was quite detailed. The photos of the first time he entered the Hell Gang's stronghold, the abandoned factory that was destroyed after fighting Spider-Man and the bloody Osborn. The building, and even the fire hose that Fang Tian crushed to flush his body after fighting with Professor Lizard. Several of the photos were taken from the sky, perhaps the work of reconnaissance aircraft. Fang Tian can be vaguely seen he looked like that. He threw the photo down casually and said, you two, show me these, what do you mean? Coulson put the photos away, sorted them out, and put them in his briefcase. We have no malicious intent, we just want to understand the true situation of this matter. But sir, there is no need to pretend to be confused, we already have your identity. Fang Tian looked very interested. What is my identity? Mutants, or superhumans? How about Mr. Fang introduce himself? Maybe we will have opportunities to cooperate with Mr. Fang in the future. Fang Tiandao is really interested in this. After joining the Avengers, do you still worry about no one coming to beat him? Of course, even if he joins the alliance, he will still go his own way and won't give any bullshit orders. If someone is unhappy, then just come and beat him. He has been waiting to be beaten. But of course Fang Tian will not say this. The current Avengers alliance is still out of the question. Fang Tian looked serious and said formally, since you have already discovered it, so I won't hide it anymore. Listen carefully, I will only say it once. Coulson and Black Widow made a gesture of listening. Sir, please speak. Actually, I am not from Earth. My home planet, Krypton, was facing destruction. Before its destruction, my parents sent me to Earth. I grew up on Earth, receiving the power of the sun. In this incident, Spider-Man and I discovered the clues and solved it together. Coulson and Black Widow said in unison, Are you kidding me? You know, there is DC Comics in this world, and there are also Superman comics. Of course, Marvel does not exist. Fang Tian's face was serious. Who is teasing you? If I tell the truth, you still don't believe me. No matter how they asked, Fang Tian just said that he was a Kryptonian from Krypton. If those two people don't believe it, it's none of Fang Tian's business. If they believe it, finding some kryptonite to deal with him will make him laugh out loud. In the end, the two of them still didn't get any useful information. Regarding the Professor Lizard incident that just happened, Fang Tian naturally told the version that Gwen knew. This version is not afraid of cheating. At the critical moment, only Fang Tian and Professor Lizard are there. The satellite in the sky was obscured by the mist again, and nothing clear could be photographed. Even if they go to Spider-Man, I believe they won't get any different words. Having said that, Spider-Man seems to be monitored by S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, otherwise Coulson wouldn't know about Ant-Man. Knowing what happened, the two said goodbye. Before leaving the house, Chow Fengtian, the Black Widow, smiled without knowing what she meant. When Coulson and Natasha went out, Fang Tian's keen senses vaguely heard reports of snipers evacuating in the distance, at least 1 kilometer away. No wonder he didn't notice it when he came back. After all, it was impossible for him to concentrate on listening all the time. It seemed that the two people who were in the room just now were not as calm as they appeared. It would be a lie to say that Fang Tian has no crush on the beautiful Black Widow Natasha. But he knew that Natasha had been a spy for decades and was proficient in spy skills. Obtaining information through beauty is also one of her skills. It can be said that Natasha's nickname of Black Widow did not come out of thin air. There are only wrong names, not wrong nicknames. She is a poisonous beauty. For a person like this, it is extremely difficult to get her to show her sincerity. Fang Tian was not in the mood to play this kind of game, so a friendly game occasionally would be a good choice. Let's talk about Coulson and Black Widow. When Coulson was talking to Fang Tian, he was actually connected to Nick Fury, director of S.H.I.E.L.D., and he heard all the conversations between the two parties. After going out, Coulson reported to Fury, Sir, what do you think about this matter? Nick Fury's voice came. The process of Dr. Lizard's matters should be like this, but for the Kryptonians, it's just nonsense. Coulson nodded in agreement. I can tell about Dr. Lizard. He may have something to hide, but the general story of what happened is unmistakable. As for the Kryptonians, he thinks we are all fools. Black Widow interjected from the side, but his abilities are really like Superman. Super strength, super speed, flying, etc. His 5 senses should also be very sharp, because before I went out, I saw that he was aware of the sniper's evacuation. All he needed was a thermal sight. Coulson was happy. In our world, all kinds of weird ability users are like crucian carp crossing the river. There are countless people with abilities similar to Superman. It's not impossible. That doesn't prove that this person is a Kryptonian. Besides, the previous files were clear, and he was obviously from Earth. Fang Tian didn't know much about the conversation between the 3 S.H.I.E.L.D. people, and he would laugh it off if he knew it. His Kryptonian remarks were just to confuse people, and he had no hope of making others believe them. When it was time to eat, Fang Tian was in no mood to cook for himself. I was about to go out to eat. As soon as I walked out of the door, a taxi happened to stop in front of me. Sir, where are you going? He doesn't believe there is such a coincidence. Hundreds of thousands of citizens turned into lizards just now, and now there are taxi drivers out for business. How can there be such a dedicated driver? Looking at the driver's physical strength, most of them he was an agent sent by S.H.I.E.L.D. He opened the door and got into the taxi. Just find a restaurant where you think the food is good. It should be the driver. Along the way, there are traces of damage everywhere. Most of the shops are closed, and there are few people in the shops that are not closed. From time to time, you can see vehicles that have been involved in car accidents lying on the roadside, and they have not had time to tow them away. It seems that the damage caused by this incident will not be small. Probably the only thing that is gratifying to the government is that after the citizens turned into lizards, their resilience has greatly increased. Even if they are injured, most of them will recover automatically, except for some injuries. Only those who are too serious need to go to the hospital for treatment. Even so, when passing by a hospital, Feng Tian still saw a long queue of people. Banners have been hung outside the hospital to remind everyone that after transforming into a lizard, they will recover again. Even if there are any sequelae, most people still refuse to leave and have to check before they feel relieved. The taxi drove for a while and walked out of the damaged area before finding a clean restaurant. Before getting off the car, Feng Tian said to the driver, "When I finish eating, I won't see you again when I come out." The driver smiled awkwardly, not knowing what to say. After paying the fare, the taxi drove away quickly. It seems that this driver is indeed an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. Normally, when S.H.I.E.L.D. agents want to monitor someone, they will send people around to pretend to be taxi drivers, store attendants, roadside newsstand owners, etc. Not only can they monitor them nearby, but they may also be able to extract some information along the way. This has almost become a routine, but in today's situation, pretending to be a taxi driver is not a wise move. The streets are deserted. Is this a good time to attract customers? The area in front of us obviously did not experience any commotion, probably because the lizard medicine did not spread. Oddly enough, whether it was due to insufficient diffusion time or whether the canary equipment was just bragging, after the lizard agent was launched, it was far from covering the entire New York City, only affecting a few 100,000 people. After entering the restaurant, Feng Tian ordered food first. While waiting for his meal to be served, he asked the boss. Sure enough, the boss saw on TV that hundreds of thousands of people in New York turned into giant lizards, and his area was not affected at all. Some reporters were not afraid of any dangers for the sake of news, and rushed into the affected areas in helicopters, regardless of the government's warnings or fear of being infected themselves. Therefore, this matter is now a sensation all over the world. When a reporter photographed the Osborne building turning red, the share price of Osborne Enterprises fell. In addition, many witnesses have proven that the green chemical mist that caused hundreds of thousands of people to mutate was launched from the roof of the Osborne Tower. As soon as the news came out, the stock price of Osborne Enterprises fell by half that day. Feng Tian didn't care about these things. The only thing he was worried about was that Osborne Enterprises must not go bankrupt if it was done like this. He is still waiting for the 2 generations of Green Goblin, one big and one small, and Electro to appear. This means that he will gain a lot of skills. If Osborne Enterprises fails, who knows whether these people will still appear. After dinner, I returned home. Unexpectedly, there was someone at home again. Feng Tian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Why are there so many visitors at home today? Is his identity already known to everyone? He entered the house angrily and looked up. By coincidence, we are still acquaintances. Or a man and a woman. The man wears red quartz glasses with switches and knobs on them, which are laser eyes. The other person, with his silver hair dancing in the wind, has a light and charming temperament. It's definitely Storm. Feng Tian was a little confused. He had nothing to do with mutants. Oh, except for the earliest days of killing a pulse-emitting mutant. However, this mutant should have nothing to do with the X-Men. At least, in Feng Tian's impression, there is no such person. Feng Tian was the first to speak. What do you two have to do? It's not a good thing to break into a house in the middle of the night. Cyclops has a bad temper and will fight back when he hears words. Storm stopped him. Hello sir, we are just here to meet you. Maybe you don't know yet, but we are your compatriots. We even fought side by side during the day. After hearing this, Feng Tian already knew what was going on. When he was eating just now, he was still wondering what was the reason why the lizard medicine only infected hundreds of thousands of people. Now it seems that the reason is clear. However, he still pretended to be confused. Compatriots. I don't understand. I've never seen you. Storm was about to answer, but suddenly stopped. Feng Tian noticed something strange and knew that Professor X was contacting her. Things were indeed as Feng Tian imagined. Professor X suddenly appeared in Storm's mind. Just listen to. Professor the dead mutant Augustus, who was able to emit pulses, collaborated with the X-Men. Not long after the incident, Professor. If this happens, the pulse is probably dead. Professor Fang Tian was also a magic weapon, and his aura was weak. The aura left at the scene was too weak. After a comprehensive analysis of many aspects, Professor X has never been able to find the murderer. It was not until then that Storm and Cyclops appeared in front of Fang Tian that Professor X discovered the abnormality. The professor communicated in Storm's mind for just a moment. After the exchange, she remained silent for now and continued the topic. During the day today, sir, he should be fighting on the roof of the Osborne Tower. Fang Tian nodded in agreement. Storm Girl said, although I didn't appear at the scene, I actually took action. The scope of the green medicinal mist is precisely under my control. Otherwise, I am afraid that the whole of New York will suffer. That's why I said we fought side by side. So that's it, the main thing is just as you said, we are indeed comrades in arms. But what do our compatriots say? Storm said matter-of-factly, we are all mutants, aren't we compatriots? Fang Tian smiled and shook his head. I'm afraid you misunderstood, I am not a mutant. Storm was a little confused. According to the professor's induction, your superpower seems to be innate, so he must be a mutant. Fang Tian suddenly realized that there was a misunderstanding in this regard. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, mutants and superpowered beings are different. Mutants are born with mutant genes, and their powers come from this. They are just awakened at different times. As for superpowers, most of them have been mutated through technological transformation or acquired accidents, and thus obtained superpowers. For example, Spider-Man, the Hulk, the Fantastic Four, etc. are all superpowers. Without genetic testing, it can be said that being born with special abilities is a characteristic of mutants. After Fang Tian was promoted to the stage of magic weapon, his whole body's energy and spirit were integrated and round. Ability comes naturally, so it's not surprising to be misunderstood. He didn't know how to explain it, so he simply said, in short, you know that I don't have mutant genes, so I'm not a mutant. Storm only thought that he was rejecting mutants and said nothing more. Before she could think about how to ask about Pulse, Cyclops couldn't wait any longer. He also heard the conversation between Professor X and Storm just now. Seeing that Storm and Fang Tian were still talking about this, he couldn't help it anymore and immediately asked, whether you are a mutant or not, let me ask you, did you kill Augustus? In Storm's heart screaming bad. Anyone with a temper will probably not like this questioning tone. Sure enough, Fang Tian suddenly frowned. What do you mean? I don't know that guy, why should I kill him? What he said was not a lie. At that time, the mutant had no time to report himself. His name was already on the street. Fang Tian only knew that he could emit pulses, but he didn't know anything else. Cyclops' tone was still aggressive. Do you know the person you beat to death on the roof today? Fang Tian looked coldly. Can I think you are provoking? Storm grabbed the topic and said, Sir, I'm very sorry, we didn't mean it. The mutant my companion asked about cooperated with us. He was killed recently, so Cyclops is a little impatient. Please forgive me. Who is? Fang Tian. He likes to make trouble most of all. If he is provoked by others, how can he let it go easily? Ignoring Storm, he still said to Cyclops, what, you just hide behind women and suck their breasts? Which man can bear this tone? Maybe Captain America is one, Cyclops is definitely not one of them. Cyclops pushed away Storm in front of him, his fingers already pressed on the switch of the glasses. A thin red light flashed away and hit Fang Tian's shoulder, burning holes as thick as a finger in his clothes, and green smoke curled up. Fang Tian didn't move at all, and Cyclops was surprised. The ray just now was able to penetrate a brick wall. How come Fang Tian wasn't even interrupted? Although I heard from Professor. Fang Tian curled his little finger contemptuously. Sure enough, he is only worthy of staying behind women and parents. With this strength, I think I can kill an ant. It's amazing, it's amazing. As he said this, he clapped his hands again and again, seemed to appreciate it very much. Cyclops was furious and wanted to fire even more powerful laser beams regardless of the consequences. Storm quickly held down his hand. Calm down. We are in the city now. If we fight, there will be countless casualties around us. Cyclops breathed heavily. The guy opposite is a man, so go to the no man's land with me to fight. Field, let's see who hasn't been weaned yet. Fang Tian gave a thumbs up. You have courage, you are really not like an ordinary child. Regardless of Cyclops's flushed face, he soared into the sky and flew towards the distance. Fly away. Cyclops shouted. Don't even think about jumping away. Aurora, follow me. Aurora didn't want to think about the conflict, but as things are now, if she doesn't get over it, it will probably get worse. In desperation, she controlled the airflow to lift Cyclops up and followed Fang Tian. Among the mutant students, Professor X also looked anxious. In this world, Professor used psychic power to invade Fang Tian's mind. Fang Tian slowed down and flew in the air in case Storm lost her. She could control the airflow to fly, but the speed was not fast. If Fang Tian used all his strength, he might be in the blink of an eye. She disappeared. At this moment, he felt a spiritual power trying to invade his mind, but could not get in. Fang Tian snorted coldly, knowing that it was Professor X. Before he was promoted to the magic weapon stage, Fang Tian was still afraid of people with psychic abilities like Professor X. He trained himself into a magic weapon body, and he was equivalent to his own master. Not to mention those perverted innate spiritual treasures, such as fallen treasure money and diamond bracelets. Generally speaking, if you want to rob someone else's magic weapon, there are two ways. The first method is to beat the owner of the magic weapon to death. Once the owner dies, the magic weapon becomes ownerless and can be used by anyone. The second is to rely on strong cultivation to erase the mark of the master of the magic weapon bit by bit. Of these two methods, the first is completely useless to Fang Tian. The second one is that he can still be effective against first-order mortal weapons and second-order magic weapons. But when it comes to the third-level magic weapon level, the situation is completely different. At this time, Fang Tian's soul has been completely integrated into his body, which is the unity of essence, energy and spirit mentioned above. In other words, there is no way to break through his soul without damaging his body. Although Professor X is powerful, he is as powerful as the ocean. The current square sky cannot be compared with it, just like a reef. No matter how big the waves of the sea are, can they still break the rocks on the seaside? This is the relationship between the two parties at this time. Facing Fang Tian's situation, it can be said that 90% of the professor's powerful strength has been lost. Originally, his spiritual power was still very gentle, and he wanted to invade in silently without harming Fang Tian. Seeing that it didn't work, this huge spiritual power turned into a huge wave and was photographed. The figure flying in the sky suddenly stopped, shook a bit, and then stood firm. The waves are splashing, the tide recedes, but the rocks still stand. Storm at the back was overjoyed when she saw this. Professor, did you take action? Professor, I'm dizzy, just shaking a little. At the same time, the impact of spiritual power continued, one wave after another, getting higher and higher. Fang Tian's situation at this time was very different from what Professor X had guessed. Professor X only saw him shaking in the air, but did not see the joy in his heart. It turns out that the professor's psychic power had little effect when he tried to invade gently. After he became violent, Fang Tian's head was dizzy with every blow, and waves of heat surged out of his body and melted into his whole body. Almost every blow is equivalent to refining the appearance of an ordinary person. It seems that mental attacks can also temper his body. This was an unexpected surprise. He had never encountered a person with psychic abilities before, and he didn't know that such a thing existed. How fast is the battle between the minds? In the blink of an eye, there are hundreds of rounds. The professor saw that Fang Tian was still standing, but in desperation, his spiritual power receded like a tide. Professor, the night was deep, and there were neither moon nor stars in the sky. Only New York City beneath our feet shone like sparks, as if the world had been turned upside down. Seeing Professor, oh, poor little pink eye, come on, Daddy will help you fight. Looking at Fang Tian's yin and yang look, even the professor in the distance was a little angry, let alone the grumpy Cyclops Scott. After hearing this, Storm was also a little angry, and thought to herself, for this person in front of me. It would be nice if someone taught him a lesson, but who made him have such a poisonous mouth? He rushed up with all his strength with Cyclops. After all, Cyclops couldn't fly. He was held up by the strong wind and couldn't stand firmly. If he wanted to attack, where could he aim accurately? In the bottom of my heart, secretly swearing, whether you have anything to do with Augustus's death or not, I must teach you a lesson today. Soon after, the three of them arrived at an uninhabited area. There was a jungle around them. Because there was no moonlight, it was pitch black. For Fang Tian, this had no impact. He could already see things in the dark. The two Storm girls, but people can't. They also have a way. I saw Storm's body levitating, and her eyes turned white, as if there were clouds rolling in her eyes. The dark clouds in the sky immediately receded, and a large circular hole of several kilometers appeared. The moonlight shone through the gaps in the dark clouds. Under the light, the surroundings seemed to be covered with a layer of silver gauze. Fang Tian did not take the opportunity to attack. Attacking was not his purpose, but seeking a beating was. This made Storm feel a little better in her heart, thinking that at least the person in front of her acted openly and above board. In fact, thunder and lightning have been prepared secretly. As long as Fang Tian has the intention of sneak attack, a thunder and lightning will come down. Professor still thinking about Fang Tian's previous taunt, he said to Storm, "Ororo, just watch the battle from the sidelines and don't interfere. Let me teach this reckless man a lesson." Chapter 31. After hearing what Cyclops said, Fang Tian felt secretly happy. Cyclops was completely angered by him. It seemed that he would be full again tonight. I just don't know what the attack power of Cyclops is. According to the comics, Cyclops can split planets apart, but this is probably unlikely. Now Fang Tian has roughly determined that this is the Marvel Cinematic Universe, not the Marvel Comics universe. To be honest, after confirming this, he breathed a sigh of relief. After all, there are too many cheaters in comics. It's at the level of the multiverse at every turn, and it's not a big deal to create a universe at will in a single thought. If he appeared in a comic, in a world with as many dicks as dogs, even if he had a golden finger, he would still be in trouble. Fang Tian raised his little finger at Cyclops' eyes, meaning clearly, "Boy, come here." Cyclops was furious and couldn't care less. He moved his fingers in his palm, and a red light as thick as his thumb shot directly into Fang Tian's chest. It seemed that he was indeed furious and had aimed at Fang Tian's vitals, instead of shooting at the shoulder like the first time. Fang Tian's original intention was to get punched. He didn't know how to dodge, so he puffed up his chest and took the blow forcefully. After receiving Cyclops' blow, he didn't take a step back, but his feet sank into the ground. Because Cyclops' ray is not so much a ray as a red shock wave. Although his red shock wave carries heat, it mainly relies on impact to hurt people. Fang Tian could basically ignore this damage, but the impact was inevitable. Pulling out his feet, Fang Tian was a little dissatisfied. He didn't know whether Cyclops' power was limited or he didn't use all his strength. This blow was much worse than Professor X's psychic shock. It seems that the stimulation is not deep enough. Fang Tian chatted a lot. Why, it hasn't even lasted a second and it's already wilted. How about I wait for you to come home for a meal and then we can continue? Speaking of eating, why don't I recommend a restaurant to you? This restaurant was taken to me by a SHIELD agent. The restaurant owner is a nice guy, maybe you two can take a liking to him. Of course, if you don't mind that the boss is a fat middle-aged man. I don't think you'll find it objectionable. Judging from your appearance, you are short and weak. You must like to be pressed down by others. Storm in the sky frowned in disgust, subconsciously moving a little further away from Cyclops. Cyclops' head was about to explode. "Ah, shut up. I'll let you know who is short and weak." The switch on the glasses in his hand was turned to the maximum, and Fang Tian ejaculated regardless of Chow's chatter, "Come over." This time, it was really extraordinary. In the first two attacks, the shock wave was only as thick as a thumb at its thickest, but this time, it was as thick as a bucket. The power contained in the two attacks is more than 100 times different. If he was hit by this blow, Fang Tian would probably run naked again. He has no habit of running around naked. Cross your arms in front of you. Fang Tian only felt a huge impact force, rushing towards him continuously. Even with his magic weapon body and a strength of more than 100 tons, he could not stand steadily and was pushed back by this impact. He was pushed further and further, and his feet carved 2 deep trenches on the ground. Cyclops' shock waves seemed to be endless and continuous. The ground between the 2 people was also burned into magma by the spilled energy. The magma was boiling violently, and the bubbles on the surface continued to explode, making sounds like firecrackers. Fang Tian's arms seemed to be roasted red, and the clothes on his body also burned. Cyclops is worthy of being the captain of the X-Men. He seems to be in bad shape in the movie. He was robbed of girls and cars by Wolverine, and was eventually beaten to death by his own girlfriend. However, his strength cannot be underestimated. It's a pity that he can't control it freely and has to rely on red quartz glasses to control the power. In addition, his physical fitness is not much stronger than ordinary people, so it is inevitable that someone will find his weakness and break it with one blow. As for Fang Tian, with his speed and agility, if he wanted to dodge, the Cyclops wouldn't even be able to hit him. Fang Tian retreated more than 1,000 meters, and all the big trees and rocks along the way were smashed into pieces, and then he and Cyclops came to a stalemate. In the sky, Storm looked dumbfounded. With the power of the shock wave released by the Cyclops, it was released continuously and could even penetrate a hill. How could it not do anything to Fang Tian's body? How hard is his body? The 2 were in a stalemate for more than 10 minutes. Cyclops finally stopped and took a deep breath. I didn't expect that you, this arrogant man, has some strength. Fang Tian shook his numb arm. Okay, you're pink eye. The massage technique is good. Visible to the naked eye, his arms were radiating heat waves, and the air was a little distorted. Even the hairs on his arms had been burned away. This is no joke. This was the first time since he advanced the magic weapon that he saw something that could hurt his hair. As I said before, Fang Tian is the body of a magic weapon, and his whole body is integrated, with no distinction between the inside and outside. In other words, if a bomb is eaten by him and then explodes inside his body without being refined in time, it will not cause any harm. The same goes for Fang Tian's hair. Even if it is not as strong as the physical body's defense, it is only slightly worse. Cyclops can burn off his hair. With this level of power, if it were just a little bigger, it might be able to hurt his oily skin. Although there is no use injuring his oily skin, running the Chaos Book once will restore him in the blink of an eye. That's what he was thinking in his heart, and Fang Tian said the same thing. Pink eye, the attack power is pretty good, it broke all the hairs on my body. If you try harder, you won't be able to break my oily skin. Said, Fang Tian also gave a thumbs up to Cyclops, with a look of praise on his face. In Fang Tian's heart, he was sincerely praising him at this time. But in Cyclops' eyes, this was a blatant insult. His face was twisted with anger, veins popped out on his forehead, and his eyes seemed to glow red. As for the feeling of admiration that Fang Tian had just felt, it had long been forgotten. No, Cyclops' eyes didn't seem to glow red when he was angry, but his eyes actually glowed red. Fang Tian put on an exaggerated look on his face. Pink eye, do you want to kill someone? Didn't you see, am I complimenting you? You came here for a sneak attack without saying a word, how despicable and shameless. The expression on his face was exaggerated, and his mouth kept talking. Fang Tian's movements are also not slow. One arm was raised, facing the red shock wave with the palm of his hand. Cyclops is really tired. He no longer had the power to shoot out a shock wave as thick as a bucket. This time, he was so angry that he tried his best to squeeze out his own strength. The shock wave that flew towards him was no more than the thickness of a calf. Therefore, this time Fang Tian just raised one arm and easily blocked the shock wave with his palm. After blocking the attack, there is still energy left to move forward. As he walked, he said, according to legend, isn't your red eye capable of firing endlessly? Why today, in less than half an hour, you are so weak? As time passed, the shock wave became thinner and thinner. A few minutes later, a puff of green smoke floated up and dissipated. At this time, Fang Tian happened to walk in front of Cyclops. Crushed Cyclops' glasses. Unexpectedly, at this moment, a thick red shock wave shot out, hitting Fang Tian directly in the face. Fang Tian, who was caught off guard, flew far away and fell to the ground with his head smashed into the earth. Fang Tian put his hands on the ground and pulled out the head he had smashed into the ground. The attack lasted only a short time and did not hurt him, but it still made him look embarrassed and no longer as handsome as before. Cyclops lay on the ground and laughed loudly. The legend is correct. I can indeed fire endless shock waves, but I am not strong enough now. How about it? Arrogant, how does it feel after receiving this blow from me? Fang Tian thought for a moment and knew what Cyclops meant. It seems that as long as Cyclops opens his eyes, he can release a shock wave, but his control is not high enough now, and he needs all his strength to control it, which will consume his energy. If it radiates endlessly and you don't have enough control, you will burn your own eyes if you say you can't. From this point of view, there is still room for improvement in Cyclops' strength. After wiping the dirt on his face, Fang Tian was not very angry. Having ridiculed Cyclops for so long, the clay figure would be angry. It was normal for him to want to take revenge on himself. Moreover, Fang Tian was eager for him to take revenge. I just suffered a small loss today, so I might as well leave some marks on Cyclops. He took a few steps and crossed a distance of tens of meters, standing in front of Cyclops with his eyes tightly closed. Since you are so enthusiastic, why don't I reciprocate? You feel good, this is my reward. As he spoke, he moved his hand that was still radiating heat close to Cyclops' back. Cyclops tried to avoid it, but how could he escape? Storm in the sky was shocked. Stop, what are you doing? Fang Tian was unmoved and continued to lean on his hot hand. With a hiss, and the sound of the red-hot iron burning the flesh, a smell of meat rose up, and Cyclops covered his buttocks and screamed. He stood up. Fang Tian chuckled and waved to Storm in the sky. How is it? This hand was burned red by Cyclops himself. Is this considered self-inflicted? Storm was furious, but she also felt amusement, which almost showed on her face. But she immediately felt a chill in her heart. What am I thinking? My companion was injured, how could I turn a blind eye and instead gloat in the sky? At that moment, she shouted sharply, if you dare to hurt my teammates, you are really asking for death. It seems that I have to teach you some lessons today. While speaking, the wind blew violently, and thunder and lightning gradually flashed around me. With the speed at which Storm can gather lightning, it is enough for Fang Tian to attack for 4 or 5 rounds. If he had meant it, Storm would have died long ago without a burial place. Fortunately, Fang Tian's purpose was to fight, not to kill, so Storm had a chance to attack. Taking advantage of the gap between her attacks, Fang Tian was busy thinking that he still had 2 empty spaces for runes in his body, which were left by upgrading the magic weapon to the middle and high grades. He had never found any good abilities. Have a good ability. The energy of chaos evolves the world, and the Book of Chaos is also all-encompassing. As long as Fang Tian is attacked by the corresponding ability, or is refined by the flesh and blood of the ability owner, he can condense the corresponding runes and use the corresponding ability. This was reflected when he upgraded his magic weapon. Before upgrading his magic weapon, he drank Lizard Potion and accordingly evolved the ability to accelerate recovery. Being shocked by electricity also evolved the ability to control electric current. It's just that he chose a more suitable spatial ability at that time. Now Fang Tian's internal space has suddenly increased to 1 kilometer in radius after being upgraded to a magic weapon. In other words, as long as he projects the space inside his body, he can teleport within 1 kilometer and appear and disappear. In addition to this, Fang Tian felt that the space in his body could evolve other abilities, but he had not developed them. Just this is enough to give his enemies a headache. I was thinking about something in my mind, and suddenly, the sky and the earth were bright. A lightning bolt about a foot thick struck down from the sky, interrupting Fang Tian's thoughts. The attack, which turned out to be Storm, finally arrived. How fast is lightning? It was a real flash of lightning, and it had already struck Fang Tian's head. Fang Tian had no time to evade and had no intention of evading. He was immediately struck in the head by lightning. Amidst the sizzling sound, the ground 4 or 5 meters around Fang Tian became scorched black, and all the flowers and plants turned into charcoal. Fang Tian only felt numb all over his body, and he wished that there would be hundreds more thunder and lightning strikes right away. It turned out that Feng Nu had a better heart and did not attack continuously. Seeing that there was no movement from Storm Girl, Fang Tian was dissatisfied and said, "Hey, white-haired girl in the sky. Why are you letting off thunder and lightning randomly? Didn't your parents tell you not to hit her with lightning randomly? What should you do if you hurt a child? Even if you don't hurt the child, it's not good to break the flowers and plants. Look, how much the surrounding environment has been damaged by you. Don't you know, Wawa are grasses alive? Listen carefully, the flowers and grasses are crying and accusing you. Storm's face turned pale, finally knowing how Cyclops felt about Fang Tianxi. It felt like I wanted to use a file to crush him into ashes. Without saying a word, hundreds of dense thunder and lightning struck down. If nothing else, Storm's wide area attacks are really awesome. There seemed to be thunder and lightning raining down for miles around, and the dazzling white light made it difficult for people to even open their eyes. Fang Tian actually enjoyed it, but Cyclops was suffering from it. Even though Storm deliberately avoided his direction, hearing the roar of thunder still made him feel frightened. You know, his glasses are broken now, his eyes are still closed, and he sees nothing. If Storm, in a fit of rage, struck him with a bolt of lightning, who would he ask to reason with? Cyclops prayed in his heart. God bless me, never let me die in the hands of that arrogant Fang Tian, but in the hands of my teammates. Single quote. Amid Cyclops's prayers and Fang Tian's comfortable whisper, the thunder and lightning that lasted for several minutes finally stopped. In the past few minutes, thousands or tens of thousands of thunder and lightning struck from the sky. It's a pity that Storm's accuracy is not good. If she strikes out one lightning bolt after another, she can still control the landing point. If hundreds of lightning strikes are sent out at the same time, she can only control the range. Otherwise, wouldn't this time make me feel satisfied? Fang Tian turned his head and looked at the dense potholes around him, thinking with dissatisfaction in his heart. Look, didn't I just educate you? Why do you want to change the environment again? Nature is the mother of mankind. If you destroy the environment, isn't it equivalent to beating your own mother? Storm was furious, and opened her hands. The surrounding storm suddenly became violent, rolling up dozens of big trees as thick as a hug, and they fell densely and overwhelmingly. Before Fang Tian could finish his words, he was hit by dozens of big trees. This time, he was not struck by thunder and lightning, and Fang Tian was a little dissatisfied. The flames rose, and dozens of big trees turned into ashes, floating down. Fang Tian used the weapon flying technique and flew like a big bird, stood up. Storm tried her best to raise the storm, trying to resist Fang Tian's approach, but it was useless. In the blink of an eye, Fang Tian, covered in flames, had flown to the opposite side of Storm. Before Storm could think of any countermeasures, I saw a big hand suddenly protruding from the flames. Storm had no time to react and watched helplessly as she was attacked. Not only that, Fang Tian also praised, but it's really good. Storm Girl became angry and screamed, "Go to hell." Several thick bolts of lightning spread out from her body, twisting and turning. It flew through the air and struck Fang Tian mercilessly. These bolts of lightning were released by Storm herself using her abilities, and they were different from the lightning that controlled nature. The thunder and lightning in nature are more violent, like a strong man. But these flashes of lightning are like gentle little hands. If it's a scrub, I'd naturally choose a big man, but compared to massaging, it's more comfortable for small hands. Of course, this is just Fang Tian's own feeling. To others, these two kinds of lightning are deadly things, and only he would think it is a massage. If Storm knew Fang Tian's thoughts, she might call him pervert a few more times. The speed of lightning emitted by oneself is faster, and the accuracy has also been improved. However, the human body's ability is limited and cannot match the inexhaustibility of nature. Therefore, the massage stopped before I could enjoy it for long. Fang Tian opened his eyes dissatisfied. "Hey, beauty, don't be so stingy, please come more." Storm Girl was already a little tired, but after hearing Fang Tian's humble words, she felt ashamed and angry, as if she was upset. Oil, salt, soy sauce and vinegar, all kinds of flavors are mixed together, the taste is indescribable. She worked up her courage and gathered the clouds in the sky, colliding with each other. Thunder and lightning sprang out, rolling and sizzling like dragons in the clouds. Now Storm has guessed that Fang Tian will not interrupt her when she is planning an attack, so she can rest assured to gather her strength without triggering it. She just keeps accumulating it, waiting for the moment to explode. As the thunder and lightning gathered in the sky, her breathing gradually calmed down, as if she had regained some strength. Fang Tian dug his ears in the sky boredly and waited. He saw the dark clouds in the sky getting thicker and thicker, and the sky collapsed, but the attack never came. He was a little impatient. Hey, white-haired girl, do you always fight like this? I have enough time to kill you 100 times. As soon as he finished speaking, fist-sized raindrops dropped in the sky. The answer fell. These raindrops are like a clarion call for charge, followed closely by a downpour. Here, the downpour is not an exaggeration, it is a real description of the scene. Fang Tian's balls ached. Do you want to drown me with water? This is too disrespectful. Storm Girl suddenly opened her eyes. Rain is conductive. There was a thunderbolt in the sky, and a line seamed to the pillar of thunder and lightning connecting heaven and earth fell. Just as Storm had originally expected, hundreds of lightning bolts following the downpour merged into one in the rain and struck down together. Fang Tian raised his head and looked at this scene that was enough to blind people. This is a bit exaggerated. As he spoke, the thunder pillar had already fallen on Fang Tian along with the rain. Even with Fang Tian's magical body, he still couldn't withstand the power of these hundreds of thunders fused together. At this time, he only felt numb, painful and itchy all over his body. Uncontrollably, he fell from the sky and fell to the ground. The pain was because the skin was burned by lightning. It was itchy because, as this unprecedentedly powerful attack came, a huge flow of heat merged into Fang Tian's body, constantly repairing the injured area. This lightning pillar that penetrated the sky and the earth lasted for more than a minute before stopping. On the ground, within a radius of 100 meters, the places touched by lightning had turned into liquid glass, and there was no trace of Fang Tian. The glazed lake rippled gently, refracting the moonlight into a rainbow of 7 colors. The sky disappeared and turned blue, as if the clouds in the entire area had been consumed by the heavy rain and thunder and lightning. After releasing this blow, Storm exhausted all her strength. When Fang Tian disappeared, a trace of regret seemed to flash through her heart. While I regretted it, I also breathed a sigh of relief. As soon as he relaxed, he couldn't even control the strong wind, and he staggered and fell from 1,000 meters altitude. Seeing that the charming Storm Girl is about to turn into a piece of meat that no one can recognize, a figure suddenly flew out of the glazed lake. It was Fang Tian. At this time, all his hair, eyebrows and beard had completely disappeared. Only the skin all over his body is still as white and tender as before. Not caring about anything else, Fang Tian flew up. He originally wanted to catch Storm with his arms, but suddenly remembered the fate of Cyclops and quickly put away his arms. He reached out his fingers and pinched Storm's collar. Storm's falling body paused, but immediately, the collar was burned to pieces by the hot fingers, and Storm continued to fall downwards. Fang Tian reached out and squeezed again, and the thing happened again. Repeatedly, again, and 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 finally, Storm landed safely. But at this time, her clothes were already in tatters and nothing could be covered. In fact, Storm was still awake at this time. But she was exhausted, watching helplessly as her clothes were torn bit by bit, but there was nothing she could do. When Storm showed off her power just now, Cyclops was affected and was so shocked that he foamed at the mouth and fainted to the ground. Even if he didn't faint, he didn't dare to open his eyes because his glasses were crushed by Fang Tian. Therefore, only Fang Tian can appreciate this beautiful scenery. He looked around the beautiful woman on the ground, then looked again. It's a pity that his body is still hot and he doesn't dare to reach out to touch the beautiful woman. He can only satisfy his eyesight. The beauty's clothes on the ground were in tatters, and there was a man squatting in front of her. If someone saw this scene, they might think something wrong. After landing from the sky and resting for a while, he regained some strength and covered his body with a flushed face. Don't look. The only people who were awake at the scene were Storm and herself. Fang Tian was naked and didn't feel anything. What a shy place. Showing off the bulging muscles on his body, he smiled coquettishly. Beautiful lady, you've even taken my eyes off me. I only glanced at you a few times, but I still feel a little bit at a disadvantage. He looked at the person in front of him swaying shamelessly. Storm wished she could faint too. After hearing what he said, Storm became furious. Don't talk nonsense here. Who is peeking at you? Looking at you is simply staining my eyes. Fang Tian stood up with a smile. Who is peeking at you, isn't it obvious now? Storm on the ground quickly closed her eyes, her cheeks were burning, and steam seemed to be coming out of her forehead. After closing my eyes, I didn't hear anyone speak for a long time. Fang Tian took back his hand with satisfaction and stood up. Even if you attack me for no reason, I will charge you a little interest. He raised his hand and sniffed it, with an intoxicated look on his face. Storm was furious. What do you mean by attacking you for no reason? If you hadn't been deliberately provocative, we would have just wanted to connect with our compatriots who were fighting side by side. Even if I listened to Professor X later, I just wanted to ask you a question. Is it our fault that things have developed into this situation? With this thought in her mind, Storm didn't say it out loud. As soon as these words are spoken, who knows what this hateful person in front of him will do? Although he drooled over the beautiful Storm, Fang Tian was not so thirsty that he thought about what would happen in the mud in the wilderness. After he had enough of his eyesore, he wanted to get up and leave. He said to Storm, "Can your people take you two back? Or do you want me to send you back with my own hands?" Fang Tian asked, while deliberately looking her up and down. Storm said angrily, "If you want to leave, leave quickly. I'll be upset when I see you." After hearing her merciless words, Fang Tian didn't feel dissatisfied. In that case, goodbye. As soon as she finished speaking, she activated the flying weapon and controlled her body to fly high into the sky. Seeing that Fang Tian was gone, Storm's tense nerves finally relaxed. Then, she looked at the scorched black ground and the laser with her hair standing on end. I looked at my eyes and the tattered clothes on my body, and felt a little worried. I raised my hand to tidy up the clothes on my upper body, but the clothes were damaged too much, and no matter how I tidied them up, they still looked the same. The school did have a way to pick them up, but how could she meet people dressed like this? She was worried in her heart, and she couldn't help but say, "You really don't have any gentlemanly manners. You just took advantage of someone, patted your butt and turned around and walked away. Are you so irresponsible?" At this moment, laughter came from the sky. "What, beauty, we just separated and you miss me." The person who came was none other than Fang Tian, wearing casual sportswear and holding a few women's clothes. It turned out that he also thought about this when he flew away, so he simply found a clothing store and went there. A few pieces of clothes came out and he turned around and hurried over. When he got here, he happened to hear Storm's words and couldn't help teasing her. Storm reflexively wanted to cover herself, but then she put her hand down and broke the jar. "Anyway, I have looked at it and touched it, so what will happen if he looks at it a few more times? Stop talking nonsense and get the clothes in your hands quickly." Fang Tian didn't refute. He flew down from the sky and handed the clothes to Storm. He looked at her with a smile and refused to leave. Storm Girl took the clothes from Fang Tian's hand, but she didn't see any movement from him for a long time and froze in place. "The clothes in your hands are not the same if you wear them, or if you don't wear them. Aren't you anxious to go home? Why aren't you moving now?" Fang Tian looked at her intently. "What's the rush? There's nothing urgent about going home now." When Storm looked at it, she just said that the person opposite would not let it go today. Finally, she had a change of thought and simply put her coat on over her original tattered clothes. After putting it on, she reached into the coat and tore it with all her strength. With a sneer, there was already a piece of tattered clothes in her hands. She looked at Fang Tian provocatively. "Now, what else is there?" Fang Tian was a little disappointed when he didn't see the scene he imagined. He was not in the mood to stay here. After hearing Storm's provocation, he twitched the corner of his mouth with unknown meaning. Suddenly he stepped forward and pulled the beauty who was caught off guard. He walked into his arms, grabbed her a few times, and then let her go. "I'll teach you something weird, provoking is no good when facing someone you can't resist." As he spoke, he soared into the sky and disappeared in the blink of an eye. This time, he really went home. Storm, who was left in the same place, was filled with resentment. "Don't let me meet you again, next time I meet you, so I." At this point, she suddenly became speechless. What can she do to Fang Tian? After being unable to think of any results for a while, Storm stamped her foot and avoided the topic. "I won't make it easy for you anyway." As she spoke, She used the communicator to call the beast. "Hank, can you hear me?" The beast's voice soon came the message. "Don't worry, I already know the matter. Chin and I will be here soon." Of course, Professor X told the beast what happened. When he saw Storm exhausted and falling from the sky, he was filled with worry, thinking that the already sparse X-Men would lose their numbers today. Unexpectedly, it was their enemy who saved Storm in the end. After seeing Fang Tian's actions, Professor X no longer had the intention to pursue the matter of the mutant pulse. That mutant had only cooperated with the X-Men, and it was not a close relationship. There was no need to offend someone as powerful as Fang Tian because of him. What's more, although he couldn't read the thoughts in Fang Tian's mind, looking at Fang Tian's actions tonight, Storm and Cyclops were attacking him mercilessly. In the end, Fang Tian still let them go, and finally returned. Saved Storm, who fell from exhaustion due to attacking herself. Such people, apart from speaking a little bit viciously, don't look like heinous people. The reason for this idea was that the professor saw that Storm was wearing less and less clothes. He was a respected elder, and of course he would not continue to watch, so he withdrew his mental power. Therefore, the professor did not know what happened to Fang Tian and Storm later. If he found out, he would have to tear Fang Tian alive. The professor just told the beast to wait for Storm's call and prepare to pick them up. This can be considered a coincidental misunderstanding. They were all in New York, and with the speed of the mutant school's stealth fighter, it was indeed very fast. 10 minutes later, the beast and Jean Grey had arrived. The plane landed. As soon as they got off the plane, the two saw the glazed lake on the ground and the lava road that was more than 1,000 meters long and nearly 2 meters wide. Their expressions were solemn. "Ororo, who did you meet? Is it worth all the efforts of you and Cyclops?" Storm smiled bitterly. "Didn't the professor tell you?" The beast nodded. "The professor just said there was a battle with Cyclops and the enemy. Cyclops was injured. The specific matter was not mentioned to us." Storm said. "You should check Cyclops's injury first. As for what happened just now, we will return to school. Let's talk about it." Only then did the two of them notice the Cyclops' eye, which was as black as coke, and were startled. "I went over to do a cursory inspection and felt a little relieved," he said with some confusion. "Why does it seem like Cyclops's injuries were caused by your lightning?" "Fortunately, he just suffered the aftermath and passed out, so it's nothing serious." "Storm, I'll explain this matter to you in detail. We'd better get on the plane first. The big noise just now can be seen dozens of miles away. Maybe someone will come to investigate, and there will be trouble then." Beast and Chinny thought, indeed, they had better leave as soon as possible. With Chin, a person with telekinesis ability, there is no need for a stretcher. I saw Chin wave her hand, and the Cyclops lying on the ground floated up out of thin air, and got on the plane with the three of them. On the plane, Beast and Chin were sitting in the front and passenger seats respectively. Storm found a seat to sit down and fastened her seat belt. As for Cyclops, he was also placed on the seat by Chin, and the seat belt automatically floated up and locked on him, who was still unconscious. The engine nozzle turned downward and started suddenly. Everyone only felt their bodies become heavier, and the plane had already taken off from the same spot. At this moment, Cyclops let out a scream, woke up, and tried to jump out of his seat, but was pulled back by his seat belt. There were horrific screams on the plane. The beast is flying the plane, it has just taken off and it is time to concentrate. The screams suddenly came to mind, his hands shook, and the plane almost fell to the ground. Fortunately, Jean Grey reacted quickly, activated her telekinesis, pulled the beast, and raised the direction of the plane's flight. Up high in the sky, several people were in shock. After a while, after setting it to automatic flight, the beast breathed a sigh of relief. Turning to look at Cyclops, "What are you screaming at all of a sudden? Do you know that you almost killed 4 of us?" Cyclops looked embarrassed and stiffened, not knowing what to say. When Storm saw this, she patted her forehead in realization. "I'm sorry, my fault, there is something I forgot to tell you." "Chin, what happened?" Storm glanced at Cyclops, but his face was burnt. "I can't tell how he looks." Finally, she said, "In the battle just now, Cyclops was injured in the back. He was lying on the ground when he was unconscious. Because his whole body was charred, you might not have noticed it when you checked. I think the scream just now may have been caused by the plane touching his wound when it took off. The beast was a little puzzled. Behind? What's behind? He also turned to look at Cyclops, whose body was stiff. Is it? But Cyclops nodded expressionlessly. The atmosphere on the plane became weird, and the four of them didn't know what to say. The plane flew above the clouds, and the bright stars in the sky twinkled, seeming to observe the stories happening on the earth. The beast finally couldn't help it. How did you get hurt there? Could it be that the two of you joined forces and still failed? Cyclops was a little reluctant. Although we have not joined forces, I have to say that even if Aurora and I join forces, we will not be that person's opponent. The most powerful shock wave I could control only broke the hairs on his arms. Even when he crushed my glasses, I took advantage of him and gave him a blow, but he was only knocked over. Storm suppressed her laughter and continued. Then the man got angry and touched him with his hands that were burned red by Cyclops, and things ended up like this. Chin hesitated. In other words, there is a slap mark on Cyclops' butt. As soon as these words were spoken, no one answered. The plane became quiet again. The beast said, "When you return to the academy, I will take care of your injuries." Chin asked again. Cyclops was injured. How come you, Aurora, were not injured? No, why are you wearing the same clothes you were wearing when you left the academy? What happened between you two? After discovering this, the three of them all focused their attention on Storm. Seeing the gossip-filled eyes of the three, Storm blushed with embarrassment. What do you mean? Can't the clothes I find myself after the battle work? Looking at Storm's face, the three of them felt more and more that something was wrong. However, they did not say it out loud. They just said secretly, "What a liar. You are obviously too tired to fly, and you still have time to change clothes." Could it be that Storm what really happened after fighting the opponent? Storm knew at a glance that several people didn't believe her story, but she couldn't explain it. Do you want her to tell everyone that she was taken advantage of by the enemy? Thinking of it at that scene, she felt hot and hot all over again. While Storm was thinking wildly and the remaining three people were quiet, the plane arrived at the academy. After landing, Cyclops and Beast went to the infirmary together. Storm and Chin went together. The sound of their fighting could still be heard faintly. In the infirmary, Beast suppressed a smile and treated Cyclops' injuries. After examination, Beast was also in some trouble. Scott, this is a bit difficult for you. Why is it so difficult? I'm afraid there will be scars in the future. Cyclops looked livid. You mean, I have a slap mark on my back? The Beast patted Cyclops' shoulder comfortingly. It's not that exaggerated, it's just a rough outline at most. What's more, no one else will see it. It's just that you can't sit down for a while and have to sleep on your stomach. In the infirmary, a hoarse voice came from Fang Tian. I must kill you. Professor, letting Scott suffer a little setback can be considered a good thing. According to his violent temper, if he doesn't change, how can I safely leave the school to him? I hope he can learn from this lesson. It's just that Fang Tian is so powerful, doesn't he have any weaknesses? I clearly sensed that he was one of our mutants, why didn't he admit it? Is it because they are afraid that mutants will be discriminated against? Muttering to himself again and again, the professor rubbed his aching head with some confusion. No matter how Cyclops roared, Fang Tian couldn't hear it at this time. He has returned home and is taking stock of his harvest. I really experienced too many things today. During the day, he fought a battle with Professor Lizard, killing and refining hundreds of lizards. In the afternoon, I met the famous Black Widow and Agent Coulson of S.H.I.E.L.D. At night, he still couldn't get a good rest and had another fight with the X-Men. After taking stock, I found that I was really busy today. In one day's work, the beatings received were worth all the accumulation in the past and there was still some left. After all, Professor X, Cyclops, and Storm are not good at all. In the past, when Fang Tian had not upgraded to the magic weapon, today was enough for him to upgrade twice in a row. But when he reached the level of magic weapon, the gap between each level was already very huge compared to before. Even so, today's harvest still brought him a small step closer to the next level. At this time, Fang Tian remembered the thoughts he had during the battle with Storm. Now he can still hold two kinds of runes in his body. They are the vacancies created when he upgrades to a mid-grade magic weapon and a high-grade magic weapon respectively. As for the vacancies created by upgrading to the magic weapon level, they have long been occupied by the art of fire control. In fact, each of the runes in Fang Tian's body is composed of extremely complex formations that are combined and connected with each other. He only knows what is happening but cannot know why, and can only obey the instinctive use. Now, what Fang Tian wants to condense is the runes similar to Cyclops' abilities. After making up his mind, Fang Tian focused his attention on his body. In the dark, he felt a mysterious rule, and Fang Tian gently touched it. A mysterious rune suddenly appeared in his body. Instinctively, he knew how to use this rune. It turns out that Cyclops' ability is that he can communicate with another world. In that world, there are particles like photons. After these particles move into real space, they acquire kinetic energy and continuously impact out, forming a red shock wave. In other words, the red shock wave is not actually generated by Cyclops' eyes. His eyes are only equivalent to a space channel. The rune now generated in Fang Tian's body also has the ability to communicate with different spaces. What he goes one step further than Cyclops is that the opening and closing of this space channel can be decided by his own will. With his will, the channels can change in size and appear anywhere in the body. This also means that Fang Tian can emit shock waves from his eyes like Cyclops, or he can emit shock waves from his fingers, chest, and even all over his body. Isn't that scene equivalent to clearing the screen? Thinking of this, he was a little excited. Newly acquired abilities, but if I don't give them a try, I'll always feel itchy and can't even sleep. Look at the sky outside, it's almost dawn. Anyway, with his current body, he couldn't feel any fatigue after not sleeping for 10 days and a half, so he simply decided not to sleep tonight. Carefully control the Cyclops runes in your body. No, it shouldn't be called Cyclops. How can it be called Cyclops when it can be released from all over the body? Just call it laser light. Although this ability is not actually a light or a laser, but who cares, you can call your ability whatever you like, as long as it sounds nice. Laser beam, attack, Fang Tianzhong murmured. I saw a thin red light emitting from his eyes. After the two red lights shot out, they merged together and became as thick as a little finger, punching a small round hole in the door. The entrance to the cave was extremely smooth, with green smoke rising from time to time. Suddenly there was a scream from outside, and the voice was somewhat familiar. Then came uncontrollable laughter and angry shouts. After the sound stopped, the knock on the door rang again. Get up. Fang Tian opened the door and saw Agent Coulson and Black Widow from S.H.I.E.L.D. again. Agent Coulson looked embarrassed. His head originally had a hairline that was far back, but now there was a round hole in the center, revealing his bald scalp. Fang Tian suppressed a smile. The two agents just left last night, why are they back before dawn? In fact, he had heard the footsteps outside the door long ago, and knew that it was the two agents leaving and returning. This laser beam was also shot deliberately. Otherwise, how could it be such a coincidence that it hit Cole just right? Where is Agent Sen's hair? Agent Coulson asked depressedly. What happened just now? I was about to knock on the door when suddenly there seemed to be a flash of red light that ruined my hair. As he spoke, he was arranging his hair depressedly, trying to cover up the obvious mark. Also, Agent Coulson usually pays great attention to his appearance, and always wears neat clothes. Clean it vigorously. Suddenly, there was a trench in the middle of the neat hairstyle. How could he bear it? No wonder he asked about it as soon as he entered the door, temporarily forgetting all the tasks he was tasked with. Coulson was still depressed, and Black Widow suddenly interrupted. She had been staring at Fang Tian's bright forehead since she entered the door. Now, she finally couldn't help but ask. Mr. Fang, why are you so bald after not seeing me all night? It's okay not to mention it, but when this topic is mentioned, Fang Tian is filled with bitterness. He had a fight with Professor. Among them, the battle with Professor X was a confrontation on the spiritual level. Although he was at a disadvantage, his arms became bare. Finally, it was the fight with Storm. It is estimated that when Storm fought with other people before, no one would have left her such a long time to accumulate power. This time, she had a good time, and the lightning pillars, which were 100 meters thick, hit the sky and the ground one after another. Storm hit people happily, and Fang Tian was beaten happily. Both parties were regarded as Zhou Yu beating Huang Gai, one wish was made and the other was made. The only flaw was that all the hair on Fang Tian's body was turned into char by electricity. His body had strong recovery power, and he recovered at the time after suffering a slight injury, but his hair was not like this. It's a function. If you want to restore your old outlook, you probably have to wait a little longer. Thinking about how long he will have to be bald, Fang Tian felt unhappy. He turned to look at Coulson, who was still worried about his hair, and the corners of his mouth twitched. A hint of a sinister smile. Since I'm unhappy, wouldn't it be nice to let someone else accompany me? His eyes flashed red, and Coulson's hair had turned into green smoke, leaving only his shiny forehead without any harm, showing Fang Tian's excellent control. But Coulson didn't think so. He only felt his forehead getting hot, and his black hair suddenly disappeared. He touched his shiny forehead in disbelief, and he wanted to without tears. He pointed at Fang Tian tremblingly. What's going on? When you two were talking, why did you suddenly turn your anger on me? Seeing someone accompanying him in his sorrow, Fang Tian felt a lot more relaxed. Hee, don't you think this hairstyle is great? It's relaxing and cool. Coulson roared in his heart, with countless thoughts rolling in his mind. He wanted to draw his gun right now and shoot the smiling Fang Tian into a sieve. However, he also knew a little about Fang Tian's strength. He knew that if he drew his gun, he would only die. It would be himself. He took several deep breaths before suppressing the impulsive thoughts. Black Widow looked at Coulson, and the more she looked at it, the more funny she felt. Finally, she couldn't help but burst into laughter. Her stomach hurt from laughing and she couldn't stop. Calm down. Coulson's face turned livid and he roared, why are you laughing? If you laugh again, I will make you bald too. Black Widow smiled and winked. Mr. Coulson, the 8th level agent, how do you want to turn me into a bald head? Come over and hit me. Coulson felt sad and angry in his heart. The hateful man and woman in front of him, I can't beat him alone. As the saying goes, happiness is based on the pain of others. Looking at the sad and angry Coulson, my mood finally got better. What, you two are here just to know why my hair is falling out? Coulson. No, Fang Tian interrupted him. Since you ask sincerely, I will tell you with great mercy. Us. Fang Tian raised his voice. In order to prevent the world from being destroyed and to maintain world peace, I, a Kryptonian from the M78 Nebula, went out to dye my hair last night. Then, I discovered that the United States is terrible. The inferior hair dye actually damaged my perfect hair. When I got up, I found that my perfect hair had completely fallen off, and there was not a single strand left. You think, should your bureau be responsible for this huge loss? Coulson's face was dull. Does world peace have anything to do with you dyeing your hair? I dyed my hair and my hair fell out. Is there any hair removal cream that works? What's more, if your hair falls out, what does it have to do with us? The most important thing is that we are not some bureau, but the Homeland Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics Support Bureau. Please remember it clearly. At the end of the sentence, the bald Coulson roared ferociously. Fang Tian picked his ears indifferently. No matter what game you are in, what game it is. Let me ask you one question, are supernatural events your responsibility? Coulson instinctively felt something bad, but for this kind of thing, he had to answer, yes, all supernatural events in the United States are under our control. Fang Tian raised his fingers in front of his eyes and blew on the non-existent earwax. So, do aliens count as supernatural events? Things are getting worse and worse. Coulson bites the bullet and says, probably, maybe. Fang Tian slapped his hand on the table, making a loud noise, and shouted, then tell me, does New York belong to the United States? Without waiting for Coulson to answer, Fang Tian asked a barrage of questions. There is no doubt that in New York, in the United States, I, a Kryptonian from the M78 Nebula, was persecuted. My hair was all dyed with inferior hair dye produced in the United States, murdered. Tell me, should this be under the control of some of your bureaus? Should it? Coulson's face was dull. Yes. Fang Tian clapped his hands and said in admiration, that's right. This is the attitude that any game should have, and be brave enough to take responsibility. Boy, it's up to you whether the relationship between the two planets is peace or war. Coulson. Huh, Fang Tian, is there anything else? Coulson. No more. Fang Tian. Okay, go back and have a talk with the director of your bureau and see how you can compensate me. With that said, Fang Tian pushed Coulson out of the door, who was completely stunned, and closed the door with a bang. In the room, Fang Tian drank a glass of water and moistened his throat. After fooling him for so long, he finally Coulson was deceived. Fang Tian also knew Coulson's purpose. It was nothing more than asking about the battle with Cyclops and Storm at night. After all, the battle with Storm had lightning and thunder, dozens of you can see both inside and outside. Anyone who is not blind or deaf knows that something unusual must have happened. Not to mention S.H.I.E.L.D., which is known for its sensitive intelligence. On the roadside, Black Widow and Coulson returned to the car. Coulson turned the key expressionlessly and started the car, but it didn't move forward. Tell me, what does Fang Tian's hair have to do with our situation? Black Widow has seen the farce from beginning to end. However, her duty today is to protect Coulson, so she did not remind her. What's more, compared to completing the mission, in her heart, she still cares about Coulson's embarrassment. That would be more interesting. She suppressed her laughter. Mr. Level 8 Agent, let me remind you that our agency is not called a bureau, it is called the Homeland Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics Support Bureau. By the way, his hair has something to do with us. Coulson. What are we here to do? Black Widow reminded. The documents are in your hands. Investigate the connection between last night's time and Fang Tian. Are we going to turn back now? Coulson thought for a moment. Forget it, let's go back. It seems that he will not give a reliable answer. The two drove on the road. On the way, Coulson suddenly asked, do you think he is really a Kryptonian? Black Widow. Didn't you say last time that there are all kinds of strange people with abilities on Earth? What, have you changed your mind now? But last time, I didn't know he had superhuman heat vision. The two looked at each other in silence and arrived at the S.H.I.E.L.D. building. They parked the car and walked side by side towards the inside of the building. Before they were there, two agents suddenly stopped Coulson at the door. Sir, please show me your ID. Coulson. Document. I've been here all day long, don't you know me? The two men observed him carefully for a while and hesitated. Sir. Do you have anything to do with Mr. Coulson? However, if you want to go in, it is better to ask your husband to show your ID. Coulson's face turned black because of the anger of these two people. In desperation, he still took out his ID. The two of them compared the ID with Coulson himself for a long time before letting him in. Waiting for Coulson to go away, you can still hear the two people behind muttering, what's going on? Why did he suddenly shave his head? Did he want to match the director? Black Widow was watching the joke and didn't go to help him. It wasn't until he was put in that she followed him in. After arriving, Coulson first reported the completion of the mission to Director Fury of S.H.I.E.L.D. Seeing Coulson come in, Fury was very happy. The mission is completed so quickly. But when did you change your hairstyle? Coulson ignored the director's teasing and gave a detailed report on his meeting with Fang Tian. The more Fury listened, the darker his face became. In the end, his originally dark face turned as dark as carbon hair, about there. So, you didn't get any news during this trip, and you even promised that we would compensate him for his hair. The more he talked, the angrier he became. He couldn't help but slap the table hard. You also told me that he might really be a Kryptonian from the comic book. Are you playing with me? Looking at the director's posture, Coulson's expression remained unchanged. That's it. The abilities displayed by Fang Tian are really similar to Superman. Super strength, super speed, super 5 senses. Today he showed his heat vision again. Now, the possibility that he is a Kryptonian cannot be ignored. No matter how absurd it is, we must investigate again. As for the thing you asked us to inquire about, as soon as I walked in and saw Fang Tian's appearance, I knew that he had absolutely nothing to do with what happened last night. Where could such a coincidence happen? Something happened outside where a large area was burned into glass and lava, and he just lost all his hair by coincidence. He also said it was caused by dyeing his hair, which is just nonsense. Director. Fury listened thoughtfully and ordered. Send agents to investigate Fang Tian's experiences from childhood to adulthood. I don't believe it. He has never been sick for so long. Have you had a blood test? After Coulson left, Fang Tian looked happy. Even though he knew that with Coulson's ability, he would quickly realize that he was talking nonsense, he didn't mind. What can S.H.I.E.L.D. do to him? Today's S.H.I.E.L.D. basically doesn't have any high-end combat capabilities. For powerful people like Fang Tian, it still focuses on wooing them. Didn't you see that guy? The Hulk has repeatedly wreaked havoc in the downtown area. Didn't S.H.I.E.L.D. finally blame him? Speaking of the Hulk, it seems that this big guy hasn't appeared yet. There is no information about this big green guy on the entire internet. Even Iron Man is just a playboy now and has not built his steel armor yet. Thinking of Iron Man, Fang Tian's mouth watered. Don't know what steel armor tastes like. It must be comparable to dishes prepared by a 5-star chef. If you have a chance in the future, you must steal a few sets to try them out. It's not bright yet outside, so Fang Tian now takes stock of his abilities. Now Fang Tian can be said to be powerful. First of all, the most basic thing that matters is the body of a magic weapon that gets stronger the more you fight. Now he is at the level of a low-grade magic weapon, and his body's defense power can only break a few hairs even with Cyclops' most powerful shock wave. Moreover, this kind of defensive power is full of attributes. No matter wind, rain, thunder, lightning, swords, mountains or seas of fire, he can't do anything about it. There are not many things in this world that can kill him. The second is the strength. He roughly estimated that it was at least 100 tons or more. You can throw around big trucks or whatever. Finally, there are special abilities. Fang Tian now has 5 special abilities. There is no need to mention the most basic refining ability, it is one of the most important ways for him to improve his strength. The second is the internal space. This space has the ability to store objects, and when combined with the refining ability, it can refine objects within the space. After projecting the space, you can teleport as you please. Other practical capabilities may be developed in the future. The third one is the art of controlling fire, which can control all fires in the world. At this time, the only thing Fang Tian can generate is Samadhi True Fire. Samadhi True Fire also has endless magical uses, waiting for Fang Tian to gradually develop it. The fourth is the ability to fly with weapons, which is obtained together with the skill of controlling fire after upgrading to the magic weapon level. The weapon Fang Tian controls is his own body. The last one is the laser light ability just obtained. Only this ability is simple and clear, it is just a space channel. At most, as the strength increases, the space channel will open wider and wider, and the shock wave emitted will become stronger and stronger. According to Fang Tian's induction, when his strength improves, the ability of this laser light can be integrated into the space inside the body. At that time, you can directly use the power of space in your body to open a channel to another world. At that time, there will be one more vacancy in the body, and there will be a chance to acquire one more ability. Unknowingly, in addition to his extremely powerful body, he also had so many abilities. Especially the power of space and the art of controlling fire, there is a lot of room for development. Fang Tian's mind was wandering around, and he had a sudden thought. From the novels I read in my previous life, most immortal cultivators used Samadhi True Fire to refine weapons. Now that I have Samadhi True Fire, do I have the ability to refine weapons? Since the Book of Chaos is said to be the supreme book for refining weapons, and you can train your own body into a magic weapon, can you also train other people's bodies into a magic weapon? This idea just came to mind. The Chaos Book of Consciousness immediately gave the answer. It's possible, but if someone else's body is trained into a magic weapon, the soul of the person being trained will be unable to bear it and will dissipate immediately, leaving only a magic weapon body. Of course, because this magic weapon body was made by Fang Tian, he can also control this body and use it as a magic weapon. The past that Fang Tian can bear is because his soul has been transformed by the Book of Chaos when he traveled through time. So after he traveled through time, he just ran it a few times according to the Chaos Book, and he naturally took control of the entire technique. This kind of opportunity is the only one. The Book of Chaos has been completely integrated with his soul. No one else will have the same opportunity as him. After learning the news, Fang Tian immediately gave up the idea of training others into magic weapons. Are you kidding me? Are you going to waste all your efforts just to get a magic weapon body? With this time, he might as well find more good things to eat and refine himself. However, being able to make a human body into a magic weapon means that he can also make other materials into a magic weapon. I am not afraid of the enemy's machinations, but my relatives around me do not have this ability. He will encounter more and more enemies in the future, and some of them may use dirty tricks. As the saying goes, be prepared, and it is better to avoid this kind of thing in advance. If he could refine various magic weapons and use them for his relatives, wouldn't that relieve his worries? In Fang Tian's imagination, the sky outside was already bright. There was no good material on hand now, so he couldn't verify his idea, so he had to put the idea in his heart first and talk about it later. Originally, Fang Tian planned to drop out of school after finishing Professor Lizard. But this matter has not yet been done. In addition, he has nothing to do except go to school, so he still came to school today. On the way to school, he met Gwen, and the two naturally hit the road together. Gwen also felt very strange when she saw Fang Tian's bald head. Why did he become bald after not seeing him for a day? Of course, Fang Tian would not hide anything about Gwen. Moreover, Gwen had already known about his ability, and there was no need to hide it. So he said it directly. Last night, did you see lightning and thunder in a place in the distance? Gwen nodded. The situation is so obvious, I think most of New York saw it. Yes, a few times hundreds of thunder and lightning struck one place continuously, and finally there was a pillar of thunder and lightning that was hundreds of meters thick. Everyone knew that there was something abnormal in that place. Fang Tiandao. Actually, the scene last night was the scene where I fought with two mutants. Because of this battle, my hair was also burnt by electricity. But it doesn't matter, it will grow out soon. After hearing Fang Tian's words, Gwen's eyes widened. Are you saying that you were struck by hundreds of lightning strikes and only your hair was singed by electricity? Fang Tian said nonchalantly. Didn't you already know my ability? Why are you so surprised now? Gwen rolled her eyes at Fang Tian, as fighting a big lizard on the same level as being struck by lightning. As he spoke, he took Fang Tian's hand and turned it over in front of his eyes. It looks no different from ordinary people. How can he be so strong? Fang Tian laughed. What's impossible in this world? Maybe gods in myths and legends also exist. What nonsense are you talking about? How could there be a god? Fang Tian smiled without saying a word or explaining. Let the facts prove everything. While the two were talking, they met Peter Parker. Needless to say, the first thing Spider-Man did when he saw Fang Tian was to point at him, haha, laughing. Fang Tian was of course patient in explaining Gwen's questions. But he didn't have the same patience with Parker. Seeing Spider-Man laughing non-stop, Fang Tian's expression gradually became dangerous. He squinted his eyes. Parker, is it so funny? Parker held his stomach. Isn't that funny? It's so funny, haha. Your image is really bright. Parker, do you know that if you don't seek death, you won't die? Ah, Spider-Man instinctively felt that something was not good, so he stood up and wanted to run away. Before upgrading the magic weapon, Fang Tian was on par with Parker. What's more, after upgrading the magic weapon and going through many tempers, Spider-Man just after running a few steps, Fang Tian pinched the back of his neck. Ignoring Parker's begging for mercy, he threw his arm away and threw him hundreds of meters into the air. Parker spun in the sky and saw only streaks of red light in front of his eyes. Flashed by. Before the red light even touched him, his spider sense ability was alarming like crazy. Spider-Man knew that this red light was dangerous, very dangerous. As long as he was touched, he would immediately bleed. The whole. Parker did not dare to move in midair. He knew that if he did not struggle, Fang Tian would not hurt him, but if he struggled, the situation would not necessarily be the same. Sure enough, red light flashed across, bringing up a group of people. There was a burning smell, but it didn't hurt him at all. When Parker was about to land, Fang Tian jumped up, grabbed his shoulders, and put the shocked Parker on the ground. He pulled Parker's wrinkled collar open smoothly. Fang Tian said in an admonishing tone, Parker, I have a piece of advice for you. Parker has not yet recovered from the huge sense of danger brought to him by the spider sense, and is a little distracted. What advice? Never mess with bald people in the future. You know, a bald man can destroy the earth when he gets angry. While talking, Fang Tian complained in his heart, I am bald and I have become stronger. Grandma, why is the sense of déjà vu so strong? Parker came back to his senses and was a little confused. Just when Parker came back to his senses, another person felt that his heart was about to jump out of his heart, and he kept shouting in his heart, he found me. He must have found me. This person is S.H.I.E.L.D. agents sent to monitor Fang Tian. This behavior of S.H.I.E.L.D. is considered routine. Every time a person with special abilities is discovered, S.H.I.E.L.D. will send agents to monitor him. Until it is determined that this person has no antisocial and anti-human tendencies, he will not be punished. Human society will bring too much danger, so this kind of surveillance will be gradually withdrawn. Fang Tian made two big news in one day. Naturally, S.H.I.E.L.D. will not trust him and has listed him as the most needed one. One of the goals of observation. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.